His Excellency Dr. Tobias Beacon, Ambassador, Cyber Affairs and Critical Technologies, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia, Mr. Herzal Hazri, Chief Executive, ISIS Malaysia, His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, High Commissioner, Australian High Commission, Malaysia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar organized with the Australian High Commission in Malaysia titled Let's Talk in 5G. We are most grateful to have our distinguished guests and participants in the event today. To begin this morning's program, I would like to invite Mr. Herzal Hazri, Chief Executive of ISIS Malaysia, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
His Excellency Dr. Tobias Beacon, Ambassador, Cyber Affairs and Critical Technologies, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia, His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, High Commissioner, Australian High Commission in Malaysia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. ISIS Malaysia is most pleased to welcome you to the second webinar organized with the Australian High Commission on Let's Talk in 5G. We just concluded a webinar on Quad organized with His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee and the Australian High Commission to great success a few weeks ago. We are most grateful today for the presence of His Excellency Dr. Tobias Beacon to deliver the opening remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has taught us the importance of connectivity and the digital realm. According to a recent Google report, during the pandemic, technology facilitated the access to essential goods, remote online learning, and improved health and safety responses. Without the ready-to-eat food delivery services, many working from home would find it difficult. There's no platforms like Zoom, Google Meets, or Microsoft Teams, the education system would have stalled, as well as the webinar that we are organizing today. In addition, technology improves lives where artificial intelligence lighten the loads of doctors to diagnose patients, improving triage processes. In this period, digital consumers also grew. One out of 3 current users are new, and 8 out of 10 of these new users intend to sustain online commerce activity moving forward. Against a backdrop where 91.7% of Malaysian households have access to internet, this proves that Malaysia's socio-economic future is definitely online. Now, Malaysia's digitalization development is placed against the goal set forth by the Malaysian Digital Economy Blueprint, which includes the creation of 500,000 jobs and increasing the contribution of digital economy to Malaysia's GDP to 22.6%. These endeavors would have to galvanize digital talents, empower economic sectors with necessary policies, and build the digital infrastructure needed to realize Malaysia's fourth industrial revolution and the digital economy future. Infrastructure is the backbone to this project. The 12th Malaysia Plan states that digital connectivity and inclusive development go hand in hand. Thus, increasing 4G coverage or the pursuit of 5G is centered around people. To achieve this, the nation would have to invest in quality connectivity while reaching the entire population. Internet diagnostic website Speedtest revealed that Malaysia ranks 7 out of 10 in ASEAN for the mobile internet speed test. In addition, while Malaysia's fixed broadband download speed is third in the region, it is more than 200 megabytes per second lower from the region's first. Fast and reliable connectivity is needed to enable the next generation of technologies. This place affordable, reliable, and quality telecommunication services, such as the 5G, as a vital to increase Malaysia's competitiveness in the international arena. The migration to 5G is not only a Malaysia's history. A World Economic Forum report released this year estimates that 5G will add 3.8 trillion US dollars to expected gross output by 2035, supporting around 22.8 million new jobs. Projections by Ericsson, for instance, estimates that the world's mobile 5G population coverage would hit 60% by the end of 2026. Currently, regions leading in 5G connectivity are Northeast Asia, obviously backed by China's growth, followed by North America and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, 5G technology is projected to be transformative. It would have large amounts of data, enable massive machine-type communications, and has many intricate parts in the supply chain. Due to its strategic importance, this mixture of software and infrastructure require governments and the private sector to pay attention to data and obviously cybersecurity. This means building sufficient oversight mechanisms. However, the cross-border nature of data transfers, as well as electrical and electronic supply chain strewn across the world, means the responsibility to ensure cybersecurity is definitely a collective effort. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, for the next hour or so, we'll be hearing from the speakers in Australia and Malaysia on these endeavours. The first session aims to explore the prospects of a 5G rollout. Laying out the conversation on digital transformation and infrastructure, our expert panelists would delve into the pitfalls and concerns of building 5G, as well as discuss ways forward to close any development gaps. The session is followed by a cybersecurity panel exploring possibility and vulnerabilities from the rollout of the 5G infrastructure. 5G is expected to deal with large amounts of data, thus increasing the possibilities of risk. The session would discuss appropriate approaches to build cybersecurity practices with 5G rollout and would perhaps explore strategic concerns in the rollout in itself. This event would not have been possible without the proposal by Mr. Joaquim Barbo and the support from His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, as well as the Australian High Commission in Malaysia. The program is thoughtfully put together by my colleagues, Ms. Atika Ishaq, Puan Harizan Zakaria, and Ms. Farlina Said. We are most thankful to Dr. Tobias Fikin again for delivering the opening remarks. Thank you, and I wish everyone a good forum and a fruitful exchange.
Thank you, Mr. Harizal. I would now like to invite His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, High Commissioner, Australian High Commission in Malaysia, for his welcoming remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Felina, and distinguished participants. It's a great privilege for me to be able to deliver these welcoming remarks. And at the outset, I'd like to congratulate ISIS Malaysia for hosting this webinar. And the Australian High Commission is really very pleased that we can once again partner with you on holding these public forums on emerging issues facing Malaysia and our region. And I'd also like to welcome all of the expert speakers today, including from ISIS, other think tanks, the Malaysian and Australian governments, and the private sector. And I'd especially like to welcome my colleague, Dr. Tobias Fikin, Australia's Ambassador for Cyber and Critical Technologies. I'm sure everyone here already appreciates that the upgrade in mobile telecommunications technology and the journey to 5G has the potential to be enormously transformative and consequential. When fully realised, 5G provides great opportunities for innovation, enhanced productivity, and increased international competitiveness. And Australia congratulates Malaysia for its commitment to making the promise of 5G a reality, as expressed in Malaysia's digital economy blueprint. Australia welcomes the blueprint's goal of transforming Malaysia into a digitally driven, high-income nation and a regional leader in digital economic growth. We say this as a friendly nation and as a close strategic and trading partner, including increasingly in the ICT sector. And since the establishment of Malaysia's multimedia super corridor in the 1990s, Australia's investments in Malaysia in digital technologies have grown to over 2.5 billion ringgit, with 41 companies currently active in the Malaysian market. Those Australian companies have been drawn to Malaysia due to its strategic location, attractive business environment, and the reliable infrastructure, and something which is set to improve further as Malaysia looks to roll out commercial 5G services by the end of 2021. And those investment flows aren't all one way. Australia is also a key market for Malaysia, with 11 Malaysian tech companies being listed on our stock exchange, on our securities exchange. So for Malaysian firms, Australia has been a useful test bed before expanding to markets in Europe and North America. The Australian government hopes that digital and technology collaboration between our two countries continue to grow and diversify in the years ahead. And to support that agenda, our Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade, has partnered with Malaysia's MDEC to launch the Malaysia Tech Exchange, a multi-year digital platform to help Australian tech companies looking to make Malaysia their base for expansion into ASEAN, and Malaysian tech companies to expand into the Australian market. The Tech Exchange's first campaign was completed during Malaysian Tech Month in August, where Austrade and MDEC co-hosted an event bringing together Australian and Malaysian tech companies working on the Internet of Things, data analytics, and artificial intelligence. So now, as we look to the future of 5G, artificial intelligence, and cloud systems, we're reminded of the importance of also building trust and ethics in using data and technology, developing common cyber standards, as well as increasing awareness of cybersecurity. It's important we work cooperatively to shape a telecommunications ecosystem in the Indo-Pacific that's more secure, resilient, and open. In January this year, our Prime Ministers affirmed the importance of working together when they agreed to elevate our bilateral cyber cooperation to formalise it under an MOU between Australia and Malaysia's National Cybersecurity Agency. We hope to conclude that MOU in the coming months and look forward to strengthening cooperation to combat cyber threats, promote resilience, and secure critical infrastructure. I really hope that today's discussion will allow a deeper dive on all those issues, in particular how Malaysia can best capitalise on the opportunities of technology while minimising risks. Once again, I'd really like to thank ISIS Malaysia and trust that this will be a very valuable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. With great pleasure, I wish to now invite His Excellency Dr. Tobias Viken, Ambassador, Cyber Affairs and Critical Technologies, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia, for the welcoming remarks. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Great to be here, albeit virtually. I would love to be there in person. Always one of my favorite places to visit is Malaysia and KL, and share such a wonderful conversation and partnership with the Malaysian government on the issues that we're tackling here today. Great to hear the opening comments from colleagues. Herzal Hazri, Chief Executive of ISIS Malaysia. Real pleasure to hear you delve into some of the detail there on what's going on in the Malaysian context and placing that more broadly into our region. And Justin, Australian High Commissioner, good friend, Dr. Justin Lee, fabulous to see you and great to hear your words of welcome and all of the evidence that you've just provided of the partnership that we already share with Malaysia and how that's only set to grow, which hopefully I can give you a few more words on during some of my opening remarks. Thank you again for the invitation. Real privilege to be here, and it's fantastic to be in an event that supports our joint visions for a safe, secure, prosperous Indo-Pacific, in particular in cyberspace and critical technologies, which are becoming such a core tenet of our foreign policy writ large, whether it be in the region, whether it be globally. These issues are far from going away. They are growing at a pace of knots. And I think especially, as we've already heard, the focus that these areas of work have received out of necessity in the COVID situation that we all find ourselves in currently, and especially how we've seen supply chain and infrastructure resilience becoming ever more central to government thinking during this current time. Now, let me talk firstly a little bit about the international environment that we currently see in the cyber and tech landscape. And it's always good to point out when you're probably expecting a conversation into the plentiful number of risks that are abounding in this new and emerging technology environment that we find ourselves in. But it's always good to remind ourselves that fundamentally we are in an opportunity space here. And that's what we need to work hard together to take most advantage of. We rest in the Indo-Pacific, which is economically vibrant, increasingly digitally connected. Still, many parts of our region are still to be connected, which is also a fundamental opportunity for us to assist other countries in their development patterns, but also economically for all of us, that's a rich environment for us to be playing in and contributing to proactively. And harnessing the unprecedented change that we're currently seeing in the technology space. And certainly what we see is cyberspace and the technologies that feed off of that infrastructure that cyberspace provides us with, or the data that it creates, are fundamentally shaping 21st century economies and really pushing power balances in the world and the global context in which we find ourselves now. So it's what we're finding ourselves in a situation of is having to adapt to the disruptions that these technologies are causing all of us, whether we are policymakers in government, in the private sector, or in broader society. You know, these technologies and the impacts that they bring, both good and bad, are impacting all of us to a significant degree. So requires that we're all thinking squarely about these issues and challenges and how we take them on. But it's going to be vital, these technology areas, to the recovery of our region. As we find our way out of the pandemic, these technologies are going to become ever more central to our economic growth patterns as we emerge from them. But in and amongst this disruption and economic opportunity, we are also placing that into the context of an increasingly contested international environment, which is an ever-present feature of our geopolitical landscape now, and certainly our regional landscape. And we're seeing geostrategic competition play out in cyberspace and through the use of critical technologies quite regularly. And unfortunately, what we do see are that some states are quite willing to deliberately undermine democratic principles and international peace and stability through the use of these technologies, to violate fundamental freedoms and human rights through the exploitation of these technologies, and undermining the sovereignty and security of other states through disinformation, misinformation that we see perpetrated via digital means. You know, and that affects not only all of us, but it affects international relations and foreign policy in an increasingly significant manner. But our interests are certainly not going to be served by all of us turning inwards, covering our heads and eyes and ears, and hoping that it'll all go away, and letting others shape that global order. Australia and we're very committed to multilateral cooperation in support of open rules-based order and to help address those global challenges that are emerging. And we will continue to influence and shape critical institutions where Australia's security values and economic equities are at stake. And including that's ensuring that any new rules, norms, standards on cyber and critical technology support an open international system and are consistent with universal values and human rights, especially privacy protections and freedom of expression and belief. Now, one of the reasons that you invited me today to speak to you is to talk about 5G, which is one of the core elements of this new infrastructure going forward. And if you like, the 5G conversation that Australia has been through has certainly been a real push factor in the way in which we're looking at the broader critical technology environment and how we approach it both domestically and internationally. And the 5G decision point was a real inflection moment for the Australian government, where we were balancing our values, security, prosperity around decisions of which vendors would or would not be allowed to contribute to our 5G infrastructure. And as rightfully pointed out in our opening comments, 5G is a fundamentally game-changing piece of infrastructure for any society that it goes into. It will be the enabling architecture for all of those devices and widgets that you hear about so much of in the press, whether it be driverless cars, Internet of Things devices, being connected at a hyper-connected scale and pace. Those will be enabled by the 5G architectures that are put in place now. So what was the process? What did Australia think about during this consideration back in now, quite a long time ago, certainly in a technology sense, in August 2018? Well, under Australian law, network operators are required to protect telecommunications networks, including 5G networks, from unauthorized access and interference. It essentially puts a national security requirement upon the providers of telecommunications architecture in Australia. And that guidance that we provided back in August 2018 was determined following a comprehensive and objective review of the national security risks unique to 5G networks in Australia. And the challenge was put out to our operational community to essentially test the limits of our understanding of 5G architecture and seeing what cybersecurity could look like in that architecture to allow a whole array of different providers of infrastructure for 5G to be allowed into our backbone architecture. And those controls that came up are country agnostic, transparent, risk-based, and non-discriminatory. And Australia's position was based on our domestic conditions and national interests. And the purpose of the comprehensive regulatory framework that we put in place is to better manage those national security risks of espionage, sabotage, and potential foreign interference to Australia's telecommunications networks and facilities, and to better protect networks and confidential information which is stored on and carried across them from unauthorized interference and access. And essentially, it'd be really interesting to hear the rest of the discussion going forward. But essentially, we felt that 5G architecture, it couldn't be considered in the traditional cybersecurity issue, because it was such a fundamental piece of architecture that you're putting in. All of the traditional pieces of cybersecurity advice, whilst relevant and useful, could not provide that assurance around which vendor you were using, that any risk that they might bring with them could be actually moderated. So, we made that decision back in 2018, and we acknowledge and respect the position that sovereign nations take over which vendors to allow to build their 5G networks. And we continue to work with our partners internationally in this discussion. And it's clear since 2018, there's been a very lively international discussion on these issues ever since that point. And we warmly welcome Malaysia's recent decision to award Ericsson the tender to design, build and operate Malaysia's 5G network. And I think it's important for all of us that we're building awareness in our region and persisting in the development of policies and markets that manage security risks relevant to telecommunications infrastructure in the coming years, because there's still a whole array of other countries who are weighing up what their telecommunications architecture look like. So that shared experience is something that I think all of us can offer, and Malaysia, having been through this process, can also offer that advice too. We've always highlighted the importance of working together with industry, and it's great to see good friends on the panels later on to discuss that collaboration with industry and making these decisions and implementing them. It's vital that in this technology space, that's one of the pieces of the recipe going forward. And we're really committed to working in good faith with the industry providers of telecommunications architecture and also broader critical technology providers in the years to come. We're also supporting the development of new and innovative secure solutions for critical and emerging technologies like Open Radio Access Network, ORAN technology, which many of you may be au fait with, but it's really just a different kind of telecommunications network architecture currently being explored by a range of telecoms providers. And hopefully you'll get a bit of a discussion around ORAN because it's being pushed as a really useful addition to the telecommunications mix going forward. Now, I also want to, being mindful of time, talk a bit about the strategy that Australia has put into place, because for us, this environment that I've described requires good strategy in the way that we engage with international partners and provide partners with an understanding of what it is we want to achieve in that international environment. So, as I said, these issues are a top foreign policy priority for Australia. And that's why we developed our international cyber and critical tech engagement strategy. And really at its heart, it has three different key elements. It starts from the outset looking at what our core values are that we want to protect in technology. What are the values that are being baked into the technology development cycle? And what are the values that are being shaped by the ways in which technology is being absorbed into the international, regional, and domestic settings? And those values are those fundamental values that are at the core of Australian values in what we want to see technology embody. The second element of the strategy is, from a security perspective, what is it we want to protect? What is it that we want to pursue in the international security environment around this new technology environment? And we'll always support international peace and stability and secure, trusted and resilient technology in this sense. And the final aspect of it is around the prosperity piece. Well, how do we make the most of this exciting tech change that we're seeing go on? And how do we advocate for cyberspace and technology to foster sustainable economic growth and development to enhance our combined prosperity? And that includes looking at areas of supply chain resilience, of trying to understand what those kind of principles are around creating market access so that we don't get caught out with sole source supply in this technology space that we find ourselves. Now, at the heart of what we're doing, it's that idea of, and living this practically, of collaboration. How do we collaborate with our international partners and wherever they are in the globe? And we really are strengthening that with like-minded democracies and those that aren't like-minded as well. It's important that we have this broad conversation to pursue our collective interests and values. Now, really keen to look at how we build on our already flourishing bilateral relationship with Malaysia. But as Justin highlighted in his comments, of course, we are delighted to work towards lifting our cyber and tech engagement with Malaysia under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Apologies for that. With Malaysia and through groupings such as the Quad, the ASEAN Regional Forum, where we've had excellent engagement and collaboration with Malaysia, and also through the East Asia Summit and the Pacific Islands Forum. What we also work together on is capacity building work, and we have invested heavily as a government in our capacity building work. We've taken our investment from 2017 from a $4 million investment to now in 2021, we have invested just shy of $100 million in helping other countries on their digital journey, whether it be in cybersecurity uplift, whether it be in developing understanding of how to approach new technology builds, like telecommunications architecture. We work very proactively with partners in that area. And we're already taking practical action in trying to enhance our engagement with industry, civil society, and academia on an array of cyber and critical tech issues. And we've done that through a range of different partnerships, whether it be something like the Quad Tech Network, which develops and discusses research and recommendations on shared challenges around cyber and technology in the global environment. Happy to highlight the paper that was published last week on techno-diplomacy for telecommunications in the Indo-Pacific, which really does look at various options around 5G, and I would commend it to everyone who's interested in these areas. And really what we're looking to do is assist, create a more competitive playing field for critical technologies through this kind of engagement with industry and academia, but also to ensure that countries can engage in these issues and not only protect themselves from a cybersecurity point of view and be better equipped from a policy point of view and engage in those multilateral forums, but ensure that we are all involved in this conversation. We are absolutely focused on the implementation of the strategy, and if anyone is really interested to delve into the detail, you can find it on internationalcybertech.gov.au. That's internationalcybertech.gov.au. You'll find the entirety of the strategy and the way that we put our work together. Now, to conclude, because I'm coming to the end of, I've already overstretched my allotted time, I just want to restate, for the Australian government, cyberspace and critical technologies are absolutely central to our region's future. And we know that Australia is not alone in addressing the implications of technologies and the risks and opportunities they create. And this event today is absolutely evidence of that, because the key to working on these issues is doing it in partnership. They affect us all, both domestically, regionally, across our societies. So I'm truly excited about continuing and expanding our relationship on working together on these issues and implementing our strategy and our work together in the region, and really excited to hear about the outcomes of today's conversation. So again, thank you so much for organising today's event and for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that we do. And with that, I will hand back to the organisers. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tobias Vikin. That was certainly a lot of food for thought when it comes to actually setting the stage for our sessions and the panels that we'll be having following this. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the opening ceremony. We now move the morning's program to the first session of the day, which is on digital transformation and infrastructure. So there's much talk about 5G. 5G technology is lauded as a catalyst for transformation, specifically the transformation of machine-type communications. This means that 5G would influence a chain of reactions from increasing artificial intelligence capabilities to encouraging the adoption of emerging technologies in enterprises. The technology is said to be efficient for the way it delivers services. In late August, there was an announcement by Minister of Communications and Multimedia Malaysia, Tan Sri Anwar Musa, on placing internet access as a human right. The goal of 100% internet penetration is articulated in the 12 Malaysia plan, where among the aims measuring success is 100% of households subscribing to internet. The speed of mobile broadband should be more than 100 megabytes per second, and there should be wider 5G coverage. However, the penetration seems focused on 4G. Malaysia's plans is said to be unique with the concurrent expansion of 4G and 5G, in addition to the formation of the Special Purpose Vehicle Digital National Berhad to facilitate the rollout of 5G. There are perhaps two things to consider in this time and essence. At a time when regions are racing to get the technology on its feet, the imperative is not only in the rollout, but in position nations competitively. Mentioned by Mr. Herizal, also Dr. Justin Lee, is the increase in 5G subscriptions by 2026, when Northeast Asia is projected to have the largest share of 5G subscriptions, around 1.4 billion, followed by North America and Gulf Cooperation Council markets. The transformative potential of 5G is only effective once the technology and its subsequent technologies are adopted. In essence, the security of a 5G rollout needs to be considered. Regardless of its penetration, setting up a trusted ecosystem is important, especially if the users and industries are dependent on this connectivity. A trusted ecosystem would also be related to positioning a nation's competitiveness. So with us today are two speakers to shed some light on the technology and also the concerns and perhaps opportunities that can stem from the infrastructure. We have Mr. Rajiv Shah, Fellow at the International Cyber Policy Centre, Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Rajiv has worked in the cyber, intelligence and security business for more than 20 years and have observed the transformation of the internet in the hyper-connected world. Our second speaker, Mr. Edwin Yap, came from a technical background as a cellular radio frequency optimization engineer in one of Malaysia's largest telco. Since he has written on tech and technologies to earn several awards. The session will feature these two speakers, with each speaker invited for remarks up to 15 minutes. There will be about 40 minutes of discussion, and Q&A will take place after. Participants are invited to use the Q&A window in Zoom to ask questions. There is a separate function for the chat function. You may also verbally ask questions or make comments during the Q&A session with the raise hand function. The Q&A session will be given to the co-moderator, Ms. Iza Ibrahim, to facilitate. With that, I wish to invite Mr. Rajiv Shah for your presentation. Mr. Rajiv, you have the floor.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you for the introductory remarks, everyone. Really good scene setter and really glad to be here. So thank you for the invitation to participate and support this event. So I'm going to talk a little bit more detail, I guess, around some of the work that I've been doing in the last year or so around ensuring a trusted 5G ecosystem. So just got a few slides I'll just share with you as part of that. So hopefully you can see that. So what is 5G anyway? I think this has been talked about a bit. And one of the things I'll sort of try and talk about in this talk is around distinguishing some of the marketing hype you see, but what is truer 5G. Important things about 5G is it'll allow significant increase in speeds of transmission, radio interface speeds. But it's not just about speed, it's about actually increasing the number of mobile devices that we can have and that ubiquitous connectivity. So it enables what we call massive machine-to-machine communication. So what that means is we can have a much higher density. So everything, if you like, can have a mobile transmitter in it, not just your phone, but the Internet of Things, small devices, and so on. Another key thing is to reduce the latency of those communications. So we can actually have real-time signals being sent, responses being sent, control applications. Implementation can have a whole range of different architectures, and I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but you'll see this becomes important, including things called network slicing, where people can sort of bring together and across a diverse 5G network, have their own little private system, if you like, across there. And something called edge computing, which is important in terms of bringing those capabilities close to the user and reducing the latency of communications. And so we expect this to become key to many critical applications over the next 5 years. So what will 5G be used for? Well, actually, it's interesting because I think the answer is probably not what you see on the TV. Because although people might tell you 5G is a way to get a really high-speed broadband connection to your home, or maybe it's about getting 4K HD streamed to your mobile phone. I don't know about you, but trying to look at a 4K movie on my mobile phone is probably not why I'm going to spend lots of money on a 5G connection. And actually, though, probably no one really knows. And for those of you that cast your mind back, you might think, well, you've got all these ideas about what it could be. It could be about driverless cars. It could be about smart cities. We really don't know. But as I say, I wouldn't worry because some of us might remember a thing called SMS. It was a service protocol. It was a way of just sending engineering messages from a mobile phone network to handsets. And that was all it was intended to do. No one at the time when they invented it realized that that was going to become actually the primary way that we were going to communicate with each other. We stopped phoning each other. We just started texting each other. And it was never anticipated when the SMS was set up. Otherwise, I'm sure someone would allow them to be a bit more than 160 characters long. But therefore, we don't know what the killer application of 5G is going to be. But what we can probably say is that it will be something that will be probably mission critical, safety critical. And so, we may think we're very reliant today upon our mobile phones and mobile communications, but we'll become even more so as we go forward, because we won't just rely on them for talking to our friends or setting up to go and catch up with something. They'll become actually part of those key applications that are part of our everyday life. Life will grind to a halt if it stops working. And that then has very important implications for how we then need to design and build 5G networks. Even more so than they are today, these telecommunication networks become critical national infrastructure. As I say, it won't just be that we won't be able to talk to one another if they stop working, but key applications and key parts of society may grind to a halt if those communications are not working efficiently and correctly. And so when we talk about security, we talk a lot about the confidentiality of data. So how do we make sure that the data we send across these networks is private and people who aren't supposed to be able to see that data can't see it? Yes, that is very important, but it's actually not the only thing we need to worry about. We talk a lot about end-to-end encryption, and in actual fact, regardless of what you're using, whether you're using 5G or 4G or your internet connection, everything, there are things like WhatsApp and other commonly available applications, even for the everyday user, that will end-to-end encrypt that data. But just because you've stopped people from seeing exactly what content you're sending across the network doesn't necessarily mean that you've solved all your security problems. Some of the other things you might want to think about is, what about the metadata? Even people can't see what you're communicating. They can see who you're talking to, when you're talking to them. That can be valuable information. But also from security, I talked about the criticality of the system. It's also about the availability. So, what happens if someone can then take out your network completely, what we call denial of service, and suddenly it no longer works. But if you think about things like some of these 5G applications, actually there could be quite significant impacts from much more subtle changes. If someone then introduced additional latency, so communications looked maybe just a few milliseconds longer, it might not be immediately obvious, but that could have quite significant safety consequences. If you're relying on a system to send a signal out when it's starting to overheat or malfunction, so that then some other change can be made somewhere to compensate against that, and that is stopped from happening, that could have quite a significant impact. And also the integrity of data, if it's possible for someone to go in and corrupt that data or change subtly some of those signals that were being sent. Again, if you think about some of these things around, sort of smart cities or interconnected factories or things like that, the Internet of Things, the integrity of communications can have a significant impact. So when we talk about security in 5G, yes, confidentiality of data, making sure no one can see what you're saying is important, but there are a number of other aspects we need to plan in as we try and build that trusted ecosystem. So, and I'm sure some of the people who talk after me will talk a bit more about this. Security is complex, and in 5G, it's even more complicated because there are lots of different parts of a 5G system that need to work together. And therefore, you need a sort of very complex systems engineering understanding of it. So it is about understanding how your different parts of the system sit together. A few other things about 5G, apart from the fact that, as I said, 5G is going to be used for much more critical applications, so security is just generally more important, is that 5G has software everywhere. And software is, as you look around at the world of cybersecurity, software often introduces vulnerabilities, and the complexity of 5G with lots of different systems interacting with each other is likely to introduce an even richer attack surface. So again, this comes back to the fact that we need to understand that overall ecosystem of our 5G network in order to understand it, not just, Tobias talked earlier on about some of the work that we've done, for example, already early on in Australia around looking at particular suppliers and particular components and trusted those. But we need to actually think about how this all fits together. That's a good starting point around looking at individual products, but you can't just say I'm going to credit lots of individual products and assume everything's going to work together safely and securely. So as I sort of alluded to earlier on, and I think it's important to understand, if you look at what you see on the TV and all the adverts, you think that 5G is everywhere and it's all a done deal, but it's not actually. 5G is something that is still only developing across the world. And therefore, this comes to the opportunity for us. The opportunity for us is an economic opportunity to work together to develop and build these networks, but also the opportunity to actually get some of the security right up front. Again, if we cast our mind back a few decades, when you had things like some of the first mobile phone networks, they weren't designed with security in mind. The internet was never really designed for security in mind. It's for academics to talk to each other. It wasn't expected to be part of our critical infrastructure. So we have the opportunity, if we actually look at where we really are in terms of maturity of 5G, to start building in that security. So, if you look at figures, there are several hundred people, several hundred operators investing in 5G. It's estimated, by 2025, there's going to be 1.8 billion 5G connections. That sounds like a lot, but if you look at the overall growth of the mobile market, that means that actually even in the US, only less than 20% of connections will be on 5G. So there is plenty of opportunity there. And if you look at the Middle East and Africa, 3/4 of people will not only be not using 4G, but they'll actually still be on 3G. The other thing in terms of those sort of stats, as I say, lots of operators will tell you, oh, we already have 5G here, we already have 5G today. But what's important is to realize that a lot of current 5G is only partially 5G. It's all operating on top of the 4G network. And as we move towards building 5G standalone networks, that's where it'll have the most complexity, the most opportunity, and the greatest security concerns to be addressed. So as I alluded to earlier on, and I think it's a key part of this conversation today, is what this means, therefore, is there is actually a massive market opportunity. If you look at forecasts, there are 20 to 25 billion US dollars expected of global 5G equipment sales per annum for this decade. And at the moment, that market maybe is dominating a very small number of players. But there are great opportunities, I think, both for Australia and Malaysian industry to work together to capture part of that market. Because, some of that is about, the headline grabbing, the big antennas, things like that. But as I said, 5G brings a lot of virtualization and software-defined capabilities. And that's something where you don't need to go and build a massive plant or have a massive capital investment to go and build capability. You can have a laptop, you can start writing some software. We need to scale that up and make that industrial. But there are opportunities for startup companies and new businesses to come into the market and provide value and trust at that software layer. So I'm not intended to get into a massively technical discussion here, but I just thought I'd quickly just put this up to bring out this idea about what does a 5G network look like, or indeed any mobile network actually looks like a range of things. We all think of the antennas that we see on top of buildings and so on. They're actually only part of it, the access network. There's obviously the devices that people have in their hands that they use to access the network. Those antennas from the access network then connect into what we call the core networks, which are the backbone of our telephone infrastructure. And then those core networks then connect to what you might call the traditional ICT. So the data centers and the application service providers are providing those capabilities for us. But what 5G means is that we have a very strong software layer at each of those four components. And effectively, those bits of software across those different physical infrastructure can all then work together. So as a user, it looks like a sort of seamless single system. And for example, there's a thing called network slicing in 5G, where it's possible actually for an organization, although it might be using all this different shared infrastructure, to effectively have its own private slice, so that it has its own dedicated 5G network that it appears. And that clearly is a complex system that depends on these different bits of software working together with one another in harmony and also securely and trustworthy fashion. So if we move on and then look at supply chains, it's funny actually, I think maybe a couple of years ago when I started doing some of this research work, people thought supply chains were just these magical things that happen across the globe. You sort of clicked your fingers and you could order something, or you could interact with someone else and get something. We now understand, partly as the impact of the pandemic, that supply chains can be deep and complex. And that has implications around the security of supply and also around the trust of the supply chains that we have. And I think I'll sort of make a comment here that, a lot of people, we talk about things like hardware backdoors. You hear stories about grains of rice inserted on circuit boards, and that means that, you can't trust the manufacturer. And it makes good stories, but actually that sort of thing is probably quite complicated and probably not the biggest risk. I would say actually, if you want to look at how we're going to manage risks, part of the biggest risk is that managed service layer around how those different bits of software interoperate with each other. And that's the bit that's really difficult to secure as part of your supply chain, because as we all know, you don't just get your software. You could get your software from your supplier, you could test it, you could make sure you trust it all. And then what's going to happen? 2 days later, you're going to get a little message that pops up saying, important security update, you must install this now. What has that now done to your trust circle that you built around that software? Now you've got to take a new release. So you can't afford to spend, 2-3 weeks of testing that before you go and patch some urgent security issue. So having the trust of those people who provide those managed services, provide those software updates. When something goes wrong in your system, you need to get the service provider to log onto your network, have access to all functions in order to see what's going wrong and fix the problem. That's where some of the biggest risks come. And therefore, what we need to make sure is that we have trust at that layer. And trust is a whole range of things. We talk about trust as a binary thing, but it's actually multifaceted. It comes down to the organization, the management control within that organization, the culture within that organization. Does it have a good culture of security? Can we trust that the systems that they are using are ones that are trustworthy? And can we trust that the products that have been provided are trustworthy? And the answer to all those questions is never going to be 100% yes. So then we need to look at actually what are the biggest risks and what are the things that we can actually mitigate at an affordable cost. So as I said, these are all sort of complex issues, but what does this then mean? So if I just sort of stop the slides there and maybe start talking about how do we actually then take it from there? What are the implications of this? We talked about, there are some very big suppliers here, and we talked about decisions that we made in Australia that we will not use certain suppliers. And what does that mean? It means actually there are probably at the moment maybe only 2 or 3 major providers of 5G infrastructure that we're using. But that's not a good place to be. What we actually need is we need to make sure there's a thriving market. We need to avoid just sort of relying on one supplier who's going to provide that entire end-to-end service. I'm sure they would like us to take all these integrated services, and it's deceptively easy to say, yes, I'm just going to buy everything from one vendor. and then it'll all work seamlessly together. That's probably a bit of an illusion, and it might work the first day, but that's going to increase the risk longer term. So what we really need to look at is how can we promote a diverse and interoperable ecosystem. So we don't just need, that one manufacturer providing everything, because that in itself generates long-term risks. What happens to that supplier if it goes bust, if we decide we no longer trust it because it gets taken over by someone else? Or even, you don't need to talk about technology. If you go back to, the early days of farming, farmers always knew you don't just use one crop, because what happens if a disease affects that crop? Everything gets wiped out. If we all rely on one vendor, when that vendor has one security vulnerability and everything is compromised, what's our backup plan? We need to have one. So that's important from a security point of view. But again, that also then is important from an industry and a commercial development point of view, because then this is the opportunity for those new vendors to come in. Australian industry, Malaysian industry, opportunities to work together in developing these systems. But what we need to do is make sure that we can reduce those barriers to entry. So to make sure we have that open and interoperable ecosystem. And it's probably worth sort of making a brief detail here. And I think probably some of the later speakers might talk a bit more about some of these standards. I know when I started off doing some of this work, I talked to some people and said, oh, you don't need to worry. Everyone follows the same 5G standards, so everything operates with everything else. Well, anyone who's got an engineering background, such as myself, knows that's definitely not true, right? Just because everyone says that they adopt a common standard, it doesn't mean it's going to work together. The other thing about standards is they're not this sort of, abstract, idealistic thing that, that people dreamt up was going to work perfectly. Standards also actually sort of quite politicized these days as well. So you look at some of the standard setting, and you may find that people are trying to influence because, companies want to get commercial advantage. So you get standards that rely on using a particular company's patent. You have countries that want to try and influence the setting of standards so that their industry benefits, they have a competitive advantage. So yes, standards are important, but let's not just say, as I say, the definition actually of 5G, actually, if you go and look officially, is that people are using the 3GPP. Obviously, no one upgraded the name of the 3GPP to 5G, but 3GPP version 16 onwards, for example, is supposed to be the official standard. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that interoperability. So we need to try and find a way of addressing that. So I'll just sort of wrap up, I guess, by sort of putting forward some ideas around some of the suggestions of what can be done. So firstly, there is a role for regulation in order to ensure that we open up this marketplace and we mitigate some of these risks around vendor trust. So making sure there's that, vendors provide those interfaces that can control the monitoring of those systems, that we have appropriate controls on where data is stored, who has access to maintenance of systems, and we restrict that access to trusted parties. Second one actually will be around interoperability, and a recent initiative actually announced by the Australian government as part of its critical infrastructure security was to set up a 5G testing laboratory, in effect, so essentially a test bed where we can actually start to bring together these products from different members of the ecosystem and see how well they work together in practice. So it may all say on paper if one follows it, but how can we actually check that it does work in practice? And also to do some security testing, because often from that complexity of how different systems interact with each other is what can affect what can create those vulnerabilities in the system that people who want to try and hack or compromise the system can exploit. This also offers the opportunities for testing things like the new standards that were referred to earlier on, such as the Open RAN network. We provide a test bed for doing that and how they can work together. So again, I think that's an important part of the way forward. Third area will be around engagement on standards development. So, we have to realize that a lot of standard setting at the moment is maybe getting politicized, and therefore making sure that we are, along with our trusted allies, working together to influence and engage on those standards to make sure that they're set for the right technical reasons, that they don't introduce security vulnerabilities, and also that they provide the most open, or if you like, flattest market, the lowest barrier for entry in order to get the diversity of supply that we're looking for. And then I guess the last one is then around the industry policy. So how can we work together to put strategic investment, identify where those opportunities are to add that value and trust, particularly at the software layer, work together with like-minded countries and trusted allies in order to grow that capability and build out that diversity of ecosystem. So I'll sort of finish up there and leave other speakers to expand on some of these points. But in conclusion, 5G is going to change our world, that's for sure, but we probably don't really know how. But what we can be sure of is that as it starts to become more and more embedded in our society, the security of 5G is going to be critical to our national security. And therefore, to get that security to where we want to, and also to exploit the economic opportunity, we need to make sure that we bear in mind that sort of systems thinking of how everything works together across the ecosystem. We're going to need good test and integration facilities so we can get empirical evidence. We don't rely on the engineers saying, it meets this piece of paper, so trust me, it's all going to be okay. And what that should lead us into is being able to build that diverse, trusted supplier base in order to give us that trust in the ecosystem. So I'll finish off there. I'm happy to take questions when we get later on, but we'll let some of the other speakers talk a little bit more on some of these points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajiv, for demystifying what 5G is and the risks with the technologies. Perhaps when you were actually explaining, it actually came to mind that perhaps it makes sense for the telecommunications technologies, 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G to kind of coexist. I will most likely ask later, because the assumption is that 5G will be the gateway to newer computing infrastructure. So that will mean that if you actually do have 5G already set up in your country, then you would actually be able to adopt the greater computation technologies. Like I'm unsure whether quantum computing would actually be relying on things like this, but this would actually be increase the gap between some of the competitiveness when it comes to developed nations and not. And I just want to know the timeline for older tech, when it would actually be obsolete and the diminishing competitiveness. The second part, I suppose, is when you were actually talking about interoperability. So this is actually quite it's interesting to actually hear when it comes to the whole 5G backbone. It should actually have different vendors and the idea of interoperability. So I will actually have a few more questions in regards to that. But I'm actually just going to turn the floor over to Mr. Edwin Yap, just so that we actually get like what is an update about what's going on in Malaysia. And then I'll probably come back to you, Mr. Rajiv, for some responses. Thank you so much.
Well, yeah, look forward to discussing it later on.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Let me just share my screen. So we're going to talk about 5G this morning, and Rajiv, my colleague, has covered quite a fair bit on the cybersecurity and the standards section of the presentation. Today, I want to focus more on the some underlying issues with respect to Malaysia's 5G plans. So with that in mind, just let me kick it off by just telling you a little bit about myself. I run my own editorial service, and I also do some research with a company called Tech Research Asia, which happens to be based in Sydney. And I've been a freelance journalist for 20 years. I started work in a telco in the 90s, and I've been working as a tech journalist for over 20 years. So I have a unique perspective of Malaysian telecommunication scenes, because I've been involved in 2G, building the networks. I've been covering 3G, 4G, and now 5G. Now I want to start just with showing you this picture. It's a picture that I showed Miss Falina earlier on when we were doing our comms testing. And the first picture on the left there is a 1G phone, okay, or what we call first generation. And then you have on the top quarter, the Nokia 2110 is a 2G phone. Now, unbeknownst to a lot of people, the iPhone first came to the country as a 2G phone, not even as a 3G phone in 2006, 2007, around that time. And so I put up a picture here. Here's the first generation of an iPhone, which happens to be a 2G phone. Moving along, we have 3G on the Nokia, this popular brand called Nokia, which is no more, or rather not so strong these days. And then you have a couple of 4G and 5G phones. Interestingly enough, I showed you all these phones because I actually own all these phones, except for the one on the left. That one, my dad had it, from a different generation, and I actually used it in his car. Okay, the other phones is something that I've used personally myself. But I just want to give you a brief history. I don't want to talk too much about this. But basically, the first generation phones were analog based, they were voice based, they had no encryption, it was unclear, and it suffered from this thing called crosstalk. You can actually tune into another person's conversation, you know, because of the interference. Around about 92, 93, 92, 93, digital came into the picture through GSM. And you know, companies like Maxis, which used to be called Biniarang, if some of you will remember. Then you have DG, and you have some other guys that are not even in the game anymore, like this network called Adam, run by Sakura. It gives you voice, and Rajiv alluded to this issue about text, how SMS took the world by storm back then. It had clearer what we call communication, no crosstalks. Then we went on to 3G. We had introduced the concept of data, but slow data, you know, lower quality pictures and videos, but they were not very good. And then we move on to digital, high quality voice, fast data, encryption. You know, all this is what we call an evolution of our telco scene, so to speak. So 2G in 92, 93, 3G around 2005, you know, and 4G around 2013. This is where we are at now. And now we are at the cusp of a new generation, 5G. A lot of, I'm sure all of you have already heard the announcements mentioned in the papers regarding this. Now, 5G brings some interesting prospects, as Rajiv has said, all right? High quality voice, extremely fast data. He mentioned that it's unlikely you would use it to go and download 4K videos into your small screen. I think the key thing for 5G for me, covering this as a journalist, as a technical, somebody with a technical background, is the power of the low latency, the new use cases, virtual reality, augmented reality, massive IoT, Rajiv mentioned that, autonomous machines. I agree with Rajiv that we haven't really found the holy grail of the service or the application, you know, the what we call the kingmaker application. But I think based on my experience, it will be a confluence of all these applications and not one particular big killer app, so to speak. We are already beginning to see the use cases for VR and AR in everything from virtual training, virtual education, and so on and so forth. Now, moving on, what I want to say is that at this juncture, 5G has 4 I's for you all to remember. If you can't remember anything, it's the immersive experience and entertainment it brings, industry transformation. It brings together inclusive society through things like smart city and, you know, social economic benefits. And of course, with all this, I want to say that Internet of Everything has risks, as outlined by Rajiv and some other panelists that will speak after us. So some of this, if I were to kind of like draw it down to 6 boxes here, you can see faster speeds, more connections, okay, low response times. That is very important to emphasize, and it will become apparent a little later when I explain this. Energy and spectrum efficient. This is a big part, as I again will explain later. So much of the world is focused on reducing energy waste, you know, and sustainability efforts. So this is an important factor. It spawns off many use cases that is available for, as Rajiv said, you know, what you need is a innovative startup with his computer, write code, and load it up onto basically treating 5G as a conduit for services and applications. So there's also flexibility in deployment. Now, just a couple of slides that are a little bit more technical. I'm sorry for this, but slightly different from what Rajiv shown, but with similar touches. On the left, you see the base stations. UEs refer to basically our users. And what we have is on the dotted portion is the radio access network. And this is the part that interfaces with all the devices, not only just smartphones, but massive IoT type devices, sensors, all kinds of equipment that basically that can transmit and receive data. That is carried by a backhaul network to a mobile core. The backhaul network today is for 5G is it should be on a fiber basis so that it can support the high throughput. The mobile core is where you get all the other processing that is happening behind the scenes, and that is of course connected to your traditional ICT infrastructure, the internet. Now, one other slide I want to show you that may not be that familiar, but it's also important, as I will explain why later. You see on the left here, this is our traditional situation now, 4G, LTE. You have the LTE core and what we call the LTE RAN. Okay, the RAN is the radio access network. Okay, it's quite straightforward. But in the 5G scenario, you will have new elements, the darker blue that you see in front of you, a new radio or for 5G RAN will be added to the existing what we call 4G infrastructure and with a new 5G core. Okay, now this is called a non-standalone 5G system. A non-standalone, that's what NSA stands for, non-standalone 5G system. And over in the right, you have the 5G standalone system. As the word standalone alludes to, it's literally an independent system, not necessarily connected to a 4G system. Now, why do you have an NSA and an SA? Simply because an NSA is a stepping stone to a complete independent 5G system. Because in an NSA scenario, what you are doing basically is adding 5G to a legacy system like such as 4G. And it's kind of like a halfway house, if you want to think about it, between launching a full-fledged 5G network. But certain features that Rajiv alluded to earlier, this thing called network slicing, where you can basically give bandwidth, assign bandwidth based on a certain quality or service level agreement to different customers, can only happen in a 5G SA scenario, right? And these are features that are what we call revolutionary in today's standard, because in 4G you cannot do that as yet. Now, I just want to move on quickly to the idea of spectrum. Why? Because spectrum is the basis for everything. For any wireless system to work, there must be frequency spectrum for the signals to ride on. Regardless of what generations you're in, even if you're talking about 1G, you need spectrum, okay? And a lot of people get this wrong, and I want to put this right from the onset here, because to understand this is that you can put any technology on any frequency spectrum. 5G doesn't mean that it must only ride on 3.5 gigahertz. You can put 5G on 700 megahertz if you wanted to. And as we see in the next slide, I will show you how it's done, okay? Now, the thing about spectrum is that it's finite, and there's only so much of it, airwaves that are going around, and it has to be allocated by an authority. In this case, it's the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission, right? And it's licensed, and 5G is licensed. But spectrum, however, some parts of it is not really all licensed. So for example, in Wi-Fi, it's not licensed. So you can set up Wi-Fi and you can radiate and you won't get into trouble for violating any licensing requirements by MCMC. So the spectrum, as mentioned, managed by MCMC. Some issues to do with spectrum, it can carry all kinds of signal. The higher the frequency, the poorer the coverage and the indoor penetration. Now, this is something that must be explained to you, as I will become clearer coming up. The reason why is this is a physics thing and nothing you can do about it. So in other words, when we talk about a 28 gigahertz system on 5G, it's going to be very short. The coverage is very short and the indoor penetration is going to be very poor, okay? Engineers call this what you need line of sight just to support such high frequencies. But the lower the frequency, say 700 megahertz, the coverage is wide, okay? So what is the impact of this? The impact is that if you have high frequency, a lot of high frequency base stations, what you need is for the same amount of coverage area, you would need more sites, which means more cost. It impacts the quality insofar as obviously if it's a poor indoor penetration, you will get poor quality inside. And that's maybe some of you may be wondering, why is it that I always go into a mall toilet? I can't get my messages or the data is so poor inside there. That's the reason why. So why do we use high frequencies then? Because of the wide bandwidth. High frequencies can basically put more data inside there and it can transmit more data at a go. So therefore, low frequency is used for wide coverage and high frequency is used for demanding data throughput, okay? Now this is a picture of how the frequency spectrum is carved out. You can see here, the lightest green is where you get low band 5G. In Malaysia, these are the 3 bands that have been allocated to operators to use as 5G transmission. So you can get kind of like basic video streaming calls, but wide coverage. As you go further up the frequency, the coverage shrinks, right? And you have other application, higher definition bandwidth, video conferencing, streaming is possible. But the true power of 5G is really in the millimeter wave, what we call the 28G. That's where you get your autonomous drones, vehicles, telemedicine. Of course, you can still run some of these applications on the mid-band. I'm not saying that you cannot. However, it may not be optimal. Just to note that. Okay, the true power is really of the 5G we are talking about 10 to 50 times LTE speed, extreme low latency, down to 1 millisecond, is available only on 28 gigahertz. Now, this is another interesting diagram I wanted to show you all. On the x-axis, you have the year. And on the left or right axis here, or the y-axis, you have what we call the technologies. And the colors are as follows: 2G, 3G in purple, 4G in green, and 5G in orange. As you can see, you notice that around this band, the sub 1 gigahertz band or the 700 megahertz band, 2G will go all the way because that's the most basic level to have voice. 4G will also coexist with 2G. And I'm not sure whether in Malaysia, whether 5G at 700 will start in 2021 this year. I don't think so. It's going to only come perhaps in 2022. Now, on the 1 gigahertz to 2.6 gigahertz, we can see that the purple line stops at 2021 because 3G is slated to stop in by the end of the year, okay? And 2G has already kind of stopped in 2018 for those bands that are mentioned, 1.8 to 2.6 gigahertz. You know, people like Maxis and DG, they used to run 2G and 3G services, you know, on higher frequencies like 1800 megahertz, for example. And 5G will start in 2021, so we've been told end of the year, mid-band, and the 28 gigahertz millimeter wave that I was talking about, that fast standalone type kind of infrastructure, will only happen probably 2022 onwards, perhaps. There's not a lot of clarity yet about the kinds of technologies available to the media as such. But this kind of gives you a snapshot of the technologies that will be rolled out throughout the timeline we are seeing. Now, I just want to move quickly to how Malaysia is doing it. Okay, as I mentioned, MCMC is the authority to allocate the spectrum. Now, the mold of actually allotting 5G spectrum has been broken by this thing called the single hole network operator. And I will talk about it now. Okay. In the good old days, this is how spectrum is kind of like given. MCMC gives operator 1, 2, 3, 4 the spectrum, and they pay for this spectrum. So with this separate spectrum assignments and different bands, operators will compete on different service levels. They will introduce their own differentiated offering, their own target markets. They want to target SMEs, they want to target large enterprises. They will be able to do what they want with it because spectrum is given independently of all the operators. Okay. Now, before the DNB, Digital National Berhad, came into the picture, this was how the MCMC actually was hoping to divvy up the spectrum. They would form a consortium of within the operators. They will share the resources and infrastructure, and then they will go out to market with their own services. So this is slightly different from this. It's an evolution of this. The advantage of this, of course, is that you are a commonly shared infrastructure for fiber, power, towers, and building. You still can have different equipment vendors, but you compete on the service plan and pricing. And the thing about this is that you still basically are able to have some flexibility of going to market for the operators, but you share the common towers and you lower the cost, hopefully. Now, this is how a single wholesale network will work, at least one that is proposed by the government. MCMC will give the license to DNB, and the DNB basically builds the 5G network, everything from scratch, end to end. They actually then lease these sites and services to the different operators, okay? And they will also connect the tower, the building, the infrastructure, the power utilities, all the fiber that is needed for this backhaul. And the network vendor, as we know today, is Ericsson. They have been selected in June, July. They were given this deal, 11 billion. And they will basically take care of everything. And they will actually build the sites on behalf of the operators. And in return, the operators will give a fee to DNB, which will then, we've been told, be returned to MCMC, the government, for running the network. This is essentially how the new single hole network is like. What are the timelines? The timelines is that this is one of the only media reports I've seen recently on Astro that they are making considerable progress. To be honest, DNB hasn't been very forthcoming with a lot of information. I'm told I've scoured the net and did not find much announcement on their part. However, our finance minister Tengku Zulkifli did tell The Age on September 9 that phase 1 of the DNB coverage, 5G coverage, will be 10%, and in KL, Putrajaya, and Cyberjaya by year end, rising to 40% in the end of 2022 in other parts of the country, covering urban, rural, and industrial parts. And then 80% of the coverage in populated areas by 2024. This is what he was quoted as saying. Now, where has SWN been done? It's been done in a number of places, but not on a national level and not on 5G. GSMA, the GSM Association, says these are the countries, Belarus, Mexico, Rwanda. Unfortunately, they were not successful because of various problems. Okay, they suffered from low speed, delayed rollouts. EE in UK did it for rural areas only, and I believe Australia's NBN, the National Broadband Network, you know, they did use such a model, but that's for fixed broadband. So as we mentioned, the consortium model is the other model. Singapore has done it slightly differently. They have given the spectrum to 2 parties, Singtel and another consortium of M1 and StarHub, to build the standalone 5G network. So that's another model. So what are the pros and cons? This is last few slides. The pros of an SWN, as the government says, is that it avoids duplication, and that's true. And it compels operators to concentrate on the services rather than on building the network. It is touted to save capital expenditure and also a single entity to cut red tape. For example, getting the land to build the tower. This is true, objectively true. But there are several cons to it. And because the government actually intervenes with market forces and depends what economic thinking you are leaning to, this is no good. DNB is new, no experience, but they are staffed by experienced people, but they have still no precedent to fall back on as far as single wholesale networks for 5G is concerned. And it's difficult for operators to differentiate their plans and their rollout, okay? And that's what we call a single point of network failure. I think Rajiv talked about this. What if the network goes down? And we know no network is 100% up, okay? So that's some of the cons. So some questions to think about as I end here. Does 5G matter to consumers? I've written about this before, and you can allude to this on some of my writings. I wrote this in 2015, Malaysia's 4G pissing war and why it doesn't matter. Back in the day, the operators was claiming who had the fastest 4G network. And I argue in this article, it doesn't matter, because if 80% of your time is spent in two locations, whether your house or your office, and you have poor quality there, having the fastest network in Bukit Bintang or in Mid Valley doesn't matter, because you're still going to have poor services. So 5G is the same thing. 5G coverage is not useful. I mean, if it's not there, it won't be useful, okay, for consumers. Okay. Gestation for any technology will take time. I wrote about this back in 2013. It's no point putting the cart before the horse. And although I have a 5G phone here that I bought last year, I'm geared up for it because I'm an early adopter, but no 5G service. So hype always comes before reality, and the coverage must be contiguous, not necessarily wide. So in other words, when I move from PJ to KL, I need to have connection throughout the federal highway, or else the service means nothing to me, okay? It doesn't have to be wide. I don't have to get it in Sekinchan for now, okay? So if I go there for seafood, I don't have 5G, that's fine, but it needs to be contiguous. For enterprises, these are some of the issues, okay? They are what we call, can they meet the timelines? The integration to the core network, is it going to be straightforward? There are interoperability issues. Are there equitable and commercial deals and service level agreements? So I'm going to stop here because I've overtaken my time here. We can talk more about this with questions coming in. So Falina, back to you.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for that. And I do realize that we probably have only 25 minutes for Q&A. So I do feel tempted to actually go straight to Izzah and actually skipping some of the questions that I had, because I actually had some, I think, interesting, considering there would actually be differences when it comes to the 5G technology as well as 4G. So whether Malaysia's regulation environment is actually capable, or we have enough regulations for 5G. Also, you actually mentioned certain things when it comes to the operators and how it would actually be different, because from what I understand, Malaysia's systems of operators and services may be different, and that can actually impact the way some of these are, how some of the companies actually do make money, how do they actually look at it when we actually have the Digital National Berhad actually managing the spectrums. But I am actually going to just turn it over to Ms. Izzah. I'm so sorry, Mr. Rajiv. I probably just asked Ms. Izzah to actually handle this session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Farlina, for that. It was a very good discussion. And we'll start, I'm very sure, with many preconceptions, such as the, not to say deflated hype over 5G. I mean, in some cases, it's a good point to clear the air for this. So for our first question, I think I'll direct it to both our participants. How would 5G counter cyber hacking, especially for countering growing challenges or threats of growing threats such as ransomware?
So maybe I'll try and answer that. I think
Yeah.
the important thing to understand is that actually 5G is not necessarily going to help there. So I think what we have to concentrate on 5G is not introducing new threats or new vulnerabilities. But on the other hand, if we started trying to design our 5G systems to start checking if there was ransomware being sent across the network, I think potentially that introduces more risks than problems that it solves. I think it's still, users are still going to be aware of the applications they do. People are going to have to use, you're going to have the user education of not to click on links in emails that you're not familiar with, things like this. I don't think we can rely on 5G, if you like, to sort of try and clean that up. I think probably what's more important is making sure that 5G doesn't introduce, for example, new attack vectors, that, the opportunity for someone to inject additional traffic in there. But I have to say I'm sort of a glass half empty person, if you like. I don't think it's going to solve the existing problems that we have, or we should rely or expect it to do so.
Yeah, I agree with Rajiv here. To me, cybersecurity is more of a culture and partially technology play. Of course, the culture and the awareness, even whatever technologies you're using, even if you are still on 2G, you can still be conned into clicking a link. It's all down to how these guys socially engineer the debate, so to speak. So per se, I don't think 5G is able to counter ransomware. In fact, I will argue that as Rajiv said, the attack surfaces are just going to be wider and it's going to be more pervasive. That's how I would answer it.
Thank you. And moving on to the next one, it's also both of a dual-ended thing. Considering how does 5G offer increased opportunities for governments to invade? Okay, sorry. Let me just rephrase that. This is operating under the yeah, I know this is going to be leading off a little bit. Really, there are assumptions about the ability of government surveillance. So how does 5G offer increased opportunities for governments to invade the privacy of and surveil its citizens? And also through the improved capabilities for the mining of open source data. So what threats of this nature would users be exposed to?
So if I maybe slightly turn the question around. So I think the point actually is, and it comes upon the points I said, so there will be certain people that have privileged access to a network. And I think what we need to then think about is what those people with privileged access to a network are able to do and what risks that creates, and therefore who we're prepared to trust in that. So it is certainly true that, there are people who essentially have privileged access to a network that you need to give that access to in order that they can go and deal with things when they sort of find out what's gone wrong and fix problems. But we need to be aware that people in those sort of privileged positions potentially have the opportunity to certainly see the metadata of what is going on across the network, which device is communicating with which. I think, in terms of the content of that, I think, nowadays most users, even without thinking about it, are using encryption on their own devices. So maybe the content of the data that's there, and, we talked about not architecting 5G so it doesn't introduce new vulnerabilities that could compromise that end-to-end encryption. But, those people with the privileged access have the ability to see who is communicating with who. They have the ability potentially to sort of, disable people's devices or stop that communication. And therefore, I think, we have to make sure we are very understand that who has those access. The people that are given that access are either people that have got lawful authority to do so, or they're commercial suppliers that needed for maintenance of the network. And either way, we make sure that there's not only, if they need to have that access, there is auditing, for example, so we're able to see what it is that a privileged user does on the network, and that is stored securely, so we can check that anything that was done for legitimate reasons, or if people are doing things they shouldn't do, it is able to be identified afterwards and appropriate action taken.
Edwin, do you have any thoughts or comments on that too.
No, I'm nothing to add there. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. But I'll just throw in one from the side, like based on, especially with following that question, and a lot of in the beginning of both of your presentations, there's a lot of misperceptions and pre-held ideas about how 5G works, how it's going to be implemented, and immediately we jump to the very negative things about what it can do. And some actually can help, like your comments on not hyping 5G kind of also deflates that conspiracy theory about COVID vaccines and 5G somehow working symbiotically with each other, and some maybe increasing like the surveillance question. What can companies or governments do to allay those suspicions, and also to build that trust that when they actually roll 5G in?
So I think probably I would say the answer is about transparency. So, being honest about what is there. So, you can talk about what the potential future benefits are, what are the opportunities, but maybe being careful not to get too carried away. I think transparency, and this is true in all aspects of society. Transparency between government and the populations builds trust.
Yeah, I can add to that. When I was covering 3G in 2005, one of the valuable lessons I wrote about was for the telcos or operators not to overhype things. I mentioned in my slide just now, hype trumps reality. And to a certain extent, I can understand why. These guys are profit-driven enterprises. They want to make money. And so they start writing, they start advertising and say, this is the great things about 3G. And back in 2005, I think it would surprise you to know that they were already talking about video, streaming video. Nothing as close as what we call Netflix today or YouTube today on 4K. I remember going with one vendor, I shall not name the vendor, to an overseas event where we actually watched the World Athletics Championship over devices given to us in the stadium. Okay, of course we could see the live event, but we could also see the event on our devices. My goodness, if I look back now 15 years, the video was poor, it was grainy, there was lag. Even the devices had to be customized specially. You can't just pick off the shelf stuff and use to watch the video, not like you could today by just installing an app. So they had put a lot of hype to it, saying that, mobile TV, they call it, is a reality. That's 2005. But you only really saw the power of streaming recently in the last 5 years, I would say, with the faster 4G networks and the power of the open system, software-defined app-driven system, So my take is that never put the cart before the horse. There's, yes, some marketing hype can come out of it, but too much of it isn't good. And I think over the years, the operators, to be fair to them, have learned the lessons. Don't put the cart before the horse, for example. They used to sell things like location-based services. When you walk in the mall, they will send you an SMS saying, oh, there's a discount at McDonald's for 10%, It's only happening really now, with the kind of apps that we see today. So it takes 15 years for these things to really, or at least 10 years for the gestation period to take place.
Actually, this is a very good lead into the next question. I think, Edwin, especially given your coverage on, especially how Malaysia's been developing, is there a necessity to rush in the implementation of 5G, and especially when some communities in rural areas don't even have stable connections to begin with? So, and what should be the priority?
I think the priority, I would agree that generally speaking, we should not rush into 5G. And to be honest, and I'm not defending the government or the policymakers in any way, I'm taking a very objective look at it. I thought that the previous government, the Pakatan Harapan government, was pushing 5G faster than the current government, because we began writing about spectrum 5G and the showcases as early as 2019, the Langkawi showcases and things like that in April, I believe. And they were kind of rushing it. And the question I always asked the regulator at that time is, when will the spectrum be allocated? They didn't want to comment at that point in time. It was too early. So for me, no spectrum means no service. So the rest showcases, they are all just trials to me. They're just what we call lab condition kind of services. Then Corona came, and you know the rest is history. And of course, COVID really exposed the frailty of our current networks. It forced the operators to also look at themselves and say, look, we have not done well in this area, you know, and we need to improve in this area. And so the government did emphasize that they must move 4G forward. And thankfully they have. Over the past year, I think 4G coverage in nationwide has gone from 92+% to 94. I saw an article only last few days that has come up to 94. They want to push it to 96. So I think they are making efforts to push forward 4G for basic services. But it doesn't negate the fact that DNB can continue in parallel running the 5G plans. Because I think Rajiv would agree with me that the real drivers for 5G is on the enterprise side, not on the consumer side, not at least in the beginning. And if the 5G can be ready for enterprises to take economic advantages of, as what I think his final comments made reference to this, that's where I think you know, it makes sense for 5G to be rolled out, at least in the urban centers.
And just as a quick follow-up to that one too, what are your thoughts on the broadband throttling issue in Malaysia as well? Like, how do you think would that affect our rollouts?
How do you define broadband throttling? Sorry.
I think I like to ask our moderator because this is also her question.
Yeah, so that was actually technically from me. So because some parts of from what I've actually understood about the issue is that there is actually network throttling when it comes to our internet connection, and that's one of the explanations when it comes to the slower internet. So I think it would be interesting to actually hear because I suppose as regionally our internet connection is actually it's functional and it is actually there, but in comparatively at some parts it can actually not be so stable. So in that sense, I think it would just be interesting to actually hear the perspective of what it means when we actually when we actually look at the speed of the internet and then how it actually works, if it's okay.
To answer your question in short, I don't think I don't believe in internet throttling, although I think, to be fair to the operators in Malaysia have bundled enough data in a lot of the packages that they have now, even the basic ones. As for speeds, I'm not too sure that they are actually throttling it per se. They may throttle it after you pass a certain volume threshold. I understand why they are doing it, because there are some people that are exceeding their quota and not paying for it. You know, so there is some commercial consideration or economic consideration there. But by and large, I think internet throttling today may not be as prevalent as a few years ago. That's my experience. Unless somebody else, you know, want to bang the table and say no, you know, it's still very prevalent.
Thank you so much for the explanation. Back to you, Iza.
No worries. So we have another question. So within the 5G network, so there's a subset of bands, and some of them do include military wave technology.
Yes.
And you'll say like this technology can transform from normal data to interoperability. So as we currently don't have this sort of technology in Malaysia, also because it's very costly, can we expect to see any benefits to the system if Malaysia uses it with our goals of achieving 100% penetration?
I don't necessarily see penetration, 100% penetration. It kind of like can be independent of what 5G standalone massive IoT systems. They can kind of coexist with the penetration. I think the 100% penetration that I think Farlina talked about, rights to the people, not necessarily beyond 5G. I don't see 5G as 100% nationwide, not certainly in the next 5 years. So I think the 100% penetration, they are working towards the 4G so that everybody will have some basic speed. So as far as the massive IoT and the stuff that you want to do specifically for that will take advantage of network slicing and massive type communication, ultra low latency application will be very focused on enterprises, and therefore those are the fellas that are willing to fork out the money to pay for the network. Okay, how about Rajiv? Do you have an opinion?
Please.
Yeah, I think manufacturers. I think a lot of manufacturers would like enterprise consumers to go with just their system. It's good for them. It's more money. I think, as I said in my talk, I think we have to be wary about the short-term trade-off. Yes, it might short-term look good. We can get it rolled out next week because we can just buy everything from one place. But I think what's probably more important in terms of long-term sustainment and long-term cost of the system is maybe to go a little bit more slowly and make sure that when people are buying systems, they insist on saying, I don't want to just my system to work, your front end to work with your back end. I want to make sure that if I buy this component from you, that you align with these standards and I can work with multiple different vendors. So there may be superficially look easier to get something rolled out next week, but you'll regret it in a year's time or 5 years' time if we take the easy option.
Farlina, do you have any other add-ons, comments?
Yeah, so actually I wanted to build on the statement that you actually made, Mr. Rajiv, on, I think because the question that was actually the response to if different manufacturers actually complement each other. And then you actually mentioned earlier something about interoperability and then the necessity for some of these technologies to be able to at least function with each other so that we actually don't rely on one vendor. And I think like in Malaysia, we actually do have like test labs when it comes to 5G, and I think it's actually managed by Cybersecurity Malaysia. But just to actually understand a little bit better about the geostrategic component that you actually brought quite early on in this talk, when you were actually talking about some of the interoperable in standard setting and then some of the geostrategic competition that's actually happening in those spaces, would it be possible for me to actually get your perspective when it actually comes to what is actually currently happening and how that might perhaps actually impact a place like Malaysia and how we actually have our standard settings, because our E&E sector is actually one of the biggest sectors here. So just to hear your perspectives on that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I think as I talked about, it's important to engage with the standard setting. I think there has been, 20 years ago, there were, some distinguished engineers who sat in a room and did the things that were the best things for society. I think in the intervening time, I think a lot of countries are sort of therefore taken a back seat and just sort of let the engineers get on with it. And I think therefore some areas have then started to proactively engage and manage to influence that, so if you go and send more people along, and you see examples, for example, quoted where one company is pressured by its government to make sure that it supports the proposal put forward by another company from the same country, for example. So I think being alert to that and being an active participant, I think, it may be very tempting to say, all these people are doing all this work on setting the standards, we'll let them get on with the work and we'll just make use of the end product. But I think what's important is to make sure that, countries like Australia and Malaysia are engaging actively in those forums, because, they're no longer the case where you can rely on a group of, altruistic engineers to do the best thing for society. Everyone has geostrategic interests and commercial competitive interests, and only by engaging there can you make sure that your interests are part of the outcome.
I like the idea. Altruistic engineers, right? Always the technical, the technical community always like emphasizes on transparency. I suppose then I'm actually just going to pose like the last question to Mr. Edwin and yourself, Mr. Rajiv. The question number one is to Mr. Rajiv is the world actually ready for the rollout of 5G? Mr. Edwin, is Malaysia ready for the rollout of 5G? And also, I suppose if it's possible for us to actually know, like, because the sole spectrum allocator for Malaysia would be DNB, and if there would actually be concerns with that from your view, Mr. Rajiv, and also yourself, Mr. Edwin. So I will go to Mr. Edwin first, and then I'll actually call on Mr. Rajiv after this. Thank you.
In short, I would say that I wouldn't say that is Malaysia ready for 5G. I think it's going to be an evolutionary path. And I think the operators have learned this from their 3G, 4G experience. It's not going to be a, what I like to term a Christmas tree lighting situation. You know, when you decorate a Christmas tree, you put all the bells and whistles, the star on the top, and then you line the lights. And then on such a time, you just turn on the lights and poof, everything will be on. You know, wireless networks are never built this way, contrary to popular belief. You know? So they will come in stages. It will come in phases. So the phase that's outlined by Tengku Zafrul, our finance minister, to me, it's a good thing. You know, there can be a lot of debate about the wholesale network, whether that's the best way to approach it. I think that's a whole webinar by itself. But suffice it to say, I would think that this phase approach is good for the country. But what is important, I want to say, is that the government through DNB must be, to me, much more transparent, much more forthcoming with information. I have industry contacts that have said to me that there are a lot of things they do not know. They want to roll out the network by December, Putrajaya, KL, and PJ. But even now, I've been told commercial terms have not been quite, it's not really settled yet. How would the operators buy the service from DNB? How much will it cost? Are they going to be bundled? Is there a minimum commitment? So on and so forth. These things have not been fully hashed out yet. You know, there are other issues, very complex issues, like in my slides, you know, things about the integration portion. You know, are the timeline realistic? The integration to the core network. One other thing I want to say before I go is that not much is forthcoming about private 5G networks, and that this is important because if a big organization, for example, like Petronas, wants to have their own 5G networks in a particular place, say the Pengarang plant, how would they do it? You know, not a lot of information is out in the public. Maybe they are discussing in the back room, but certainly not in the public. So if I were a large, big enterprise and I want to kind of like have on my own 5G network, especially the standalone type with network slicing and so on and so forth, how would I go about doing it? A lot of bits are still missing to me. That's how I would put it.
No, that actually sounds very important because if 5G, the strength of 5G is meant to be for enterprises, but the private sector actually has no idea how to actually implement or roll it out themselves.
Well, so at least from a public point of view, maybe they are doing some backroom deals. I don't know, but certainly the media, from a media perspective, we should know more. So they have not been very forthcoming. If you just do a search of DNB, I don't think they have even, you know, lined up any serious interviews with Ralph Marshall and the rest. You know. That's my point.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So Mr. Rajiv.
So is the world ready for 5G as it's going to eventually look and the full end-to-end capability of 5G? No, it's not. But that's not necessarily a disaster because that's not going to happen for a while yet. And therefore, what we need to do is we need to actually take the action now. You know, I think, you know, Edwin made a really good point. You know, it's not going to be a sudden, you know, Christmas tree moment when we switch everything on and the dazzling world of 5G is there for us all to enjoy. That's not going to happen. it's going to happen in stages. And what we need to do is we need to take that action now to make sure that we're working to develop those capabilities and that diversity and that trusted ecosystem so that we are ready for it. So no, we're not ready, but we have time. The time is now to actually get on and do the things we need to do to make sure that we are really ready for the world of 5G that we all want.
Yeah.
And not be tempted maybe by the sort of dazzling, that 4K to your mobile phone, right? That's a nice idea, but that's not going to be the killer app. And let's not get distracted by that.
All right, thank you so much. Would you actually have any thoughts on Malaysia's single wholesale network kind of like position?
So I have to confess, it's not really my area of expertise. I think it's an interesting idea, and I think there's always a problem around efficiency of spectrum allocation. And if you look at other areas where spectrum gets bought by companies, but then it gets not used and it gets wasted, I think maybe having that sort of single wholesale allows that ability for some more efficient allocation of it. But on the other hand, it's then a sort of almost like a single point of failure as well. So there are trade-offs either way. So I won't be the expert. I think it'll be an interesting experience to see how you get on with that. I think maybe it's something that Australia and others can learn about, that sort of centralized management and allocation of spectrum, because we have different models, and I don't think anyone's got the right answer yet on its pros and cons.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that actually concludes it quite well about what we might actually be expecting when it comes to 5G. And I suppose in a way, the world is actually ready for it, but also not. The Christmas lights are actually not going to come on. I think there's various conversations that can actually be held, particularly issues with the spectrum. I actually heard like in some of the neighboring countries, they're actually learning how to reuse some of the spectrums that's actually been allocated or that's actually like being phased out. And I don't think the conversation's held in Malaysia yet. But anyways, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your expertise. Thank you, Iza, for actually managing the Q&A session. And we will actually be going for a short break. So the session would actually be coming back at 11. It should be coming back at 11:35. Yes. Thank you so much for your participation, and we look forward to having you then. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the webinar Let's Talk in 5G. This webinar is organized with the Australian High Commission in Malaysia. Moving on with this morning's program, we wish to invite the panelists of session 2 on securing ICT infrastructure of the future to take the floor. We are most pleased to invite Puan Azlena Arifin, Principal Assistant Director, Cyber Legal Integration Division from the National Cybersecurity Agency, to moderate the session. Puan Azlena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Farlina. So we had a very good discussion this morning about the digital transformation and so on. Sorry, this is what about technology and something like that. Once you forgot to press one button, it's not there. All right, thank you, Farlina, again for the introduction. And hi, Miss Jennifer, and also the other panelists, which is Lieutenant Colonel Sazali. All right, so we had a very interesting and also good discussion this morning about the digital transformation, about what would be the desired outcome of 5Gs and so on. So let's continue our session actually with the most important thing, actually securing the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure. Whenever we wanted to, go for the 5Gs, implement 5G, encourages people, encourages enterprise to go into 5Gs. So maybe first we will discuss about how we want to secure the infrastructure for the future use. Of course, there's going to be more application being added to the critical infrastructure, the enterprises once we deploy the 5G. So maybe I'll pass the floor to our speaker first for the presentation. Can we have Lieutenant Colonel Sazali to give your thoughts and also your talk on this matter? Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and good morning. Thanks to Miss Albina. Let me share my slide. Okay. Okay, I hope you can see my slide here.
Yes,
okay.
You can see your slides.
Okay. Thank you, Miss Azlina, once again. We had a very good discussion in the previous session on 5G, and it is important for us as organization users to understand all the various advanced technologies in the future, such as force IR, IoT, autonomous vehicle that can ride over 5G infrastructure, and all the various advanced applications and services that are encroaching to all aspects of our life. So we have to understand this technology in order to keep abreast with the competitiveness of today's world. And not only we have to understand how 5G changed the way we live and the way we do business, but equally important, we have to understand the way we perceive new threat with the evolution of 5G, and also we should also understand cyber security that we should implement in order to address all the relevant cyber security challenges. So these are among the issues that we will discuss in this session. And so based on this slide, in 2009, a report by World Economic Forum Global Risk Assessment, cyber attacks were listed in top 5 global risks in terms of likelihood. Starting only 2018, cyber attack didn't appear to be significant prior to 2018. Then in 2020, World Economic Forum again listed cyber attack were among top risks which were likely to increase in 2020, and this time it was a reality. As we are embracing digital technologies, we will increase the use of digital devices and connectivity. And here we have to realize we are also creating more attack surface and attack vectors. Therefore, the more we are vulnerable to cyber attack. When Malaysia first implemented a national cyber security policy way back in 2006, we have already recognized the importance of critical national information infrastructure, or NII, and its protection has been our national security priority. There are 10 sectors that we consider as CNII, where any attack on any of the sector will have potential implication on our national security and public safety. So the security of CNII continue to be our concern in many more years to come in the future. What more when we are talking about 5Gs and with the sophistication of cyber threat and criminal. I will relate this issue when we talk about the emergence of advanced technology in the era of force IR and 5G. We move on. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, with the advancement of technologies and internet today, we have come to the situation where cyber world and physical world are merging and becoming more interdependent on each other. Where power, telecommunication, medical, energy, financial, and many other services are becoming more interdependent on digital system and infrastructure. Meaning, any cyber attack, disruption on digital infrastructure will have some consequences to our life in physical world. And among the consequences is that they would cause financial losses and operational disruption that can lead to the collapse of business and social instability. In other words, the failure of network infrastructure would have the potential to cause global crisis. This is based on the report according to the Global Council for Science and the Environment, and the graph is shown on the slide. So this slide shows the current trend of technologies. And in this part, what I intend to highlight is that for us to understand and have a big picture of our cyber environment and current threat landscape. And from here, we try to understand the risks which are evolving from the application of this technology. We can see that all these technologies shown on the slide are invented mainly to provide convenient services to all users, be it organization, government, and individual. So these technologies are designed in such a way that they are user-friendly and easy to use. In reality, all these convenient things are not good for security, because security and convenience are opposite to each other. They are always opposite side of the same coin. Meaning, if we want security, technology has to be less convenient and vice versa. So how to balance between convenience and the need for security? And there is no specific formula or direct formula. And most of the time, it is up to the users or organization to decide. And of course, when we ask the users or organization, they always choose convenience over security. And furthermore, also as users, we have to understand technology is a double-edged sword. It offers both risk and opportunity. And some experts say technology has evil twin, meaning whenever new technology is invented, it also gives birth to another twin, evil twin. And we as users who use technology for good purpose, we focus on good twin. But the criminal or the threat actors, they misuse or abuse the same technology as evil twin to harm we as the users, using the same infrastructure and system. So the technology, namely mobile devices, cloud computing, wireless networks, and many other technologies as shown on the screen, in which we are using today in our day-to-day activities, have some vulnerabilities which are yet to be addressed. And at the same time, we have also to realize it is almost impossible to achieve 100% security. There is no way we can achieve a zero-risk environment. And digital technology continue to evolve and become smarter, while at the same time they get more connected. Therefore, our security become more complex and sophisticated. Today, we talk about artificial intelligence, and we can see that computer make decisions and tell us what to do. For example, in medical system, it is computer that read our blood pressure and remind us before it becomes hypertension. Modern cars are embedded with computers. They have sensors that can detect any problems and give us warning before our cars break down. And when we travel, we have GPS that provide navigational information that tell us the shortest and the fastest route to destination, making our journey very convenient. In the past, internet was about connecting people to people. It is people who create data and share information with other people. Internet also enable people to coordinate and collaborate with each other in internet environment. But today, we are talking about Internet of Things. IoT is a device-to-device connectivity. It is smart device that create data and share information with other devices. With AI, IoT enable devices to make decisions and interact and collaborate with each other without human interventions. So why I highlight this technology? Because IoT will be significant in the future, especially when we talk about 5G infrastructure, because we need to have a infrastructure that can deliver high speed and higher capacity to cater the requirement of all these advanced technologies. And when in the future, when the population grows, they will move to the city and work in the industry. Today we are talking about smart cities, smart building, smart manufacturing, so on and so forth. So IoT will be significant. Today we also have talked about force IR, blockchain, in tech, fintech, so on and so forth. So with the complexity of technology convergence and inherent risks, which are yet to be addressed, we can expect cyber threat become more complicated. Let us look at Industry 4.0. It is one of the most talked about issue nowadays among industry and even Malaysian government and public at large, because as users, sooner or later, we will be involved in Industry 4.0 environment. And then I think it is good for us to look back the history of the previous industrial revolution before we can actually understand Industry 4.0. In first industrial revolution, when it started, we saw the invention of steam, hydropower in industrial manufacturing. It is technology, the machine that replaced human labor. Second industrial revolution, we saw the invention of electricity to lower production costs and increase mass productivity. And here we can see during first and second IR, technology were used to replace human strength and human labor. When we entered third IR, we saw the invention of computers, microchips, and internet to assist people in managing information and planning and decision making. In third IR, we can see technology is used to replace human brain. Today, we are talking about fourth IR that converge and merge all the previous first, second, and third IR. And in the era of fourth industrial revolution today, we are talking about cyber, physical, and brain connectivity. And it's also about the convergence and mergence of operational technology and IT. So when we talk about smart manufacturing, it is machines that do the production, assembly, packaging, and delivery without human intervention, using the combination of robotics, IoT, data analytics, cloud computing, AI, and other key technologies. As we know, Industry 4.0 is about cyber-physical connectivity. So this cyber-physical convergence, alignment, and integration has made our cyber environment complex. We might not realize that we are using more devices and get more connected in this environment. We are creating a new cyber ecosystem all around our environment, and we also create new linkages along the various services in new global supply chain in digital form. The supply chain also changed as organization, people, and devices are getting more connected without we realize. Traditional supply chain consists of several steps: marketing, manufacturing, and distribution of products before reaching the customer. Currently, the steps are all in silo, most of them. So we can see that the complexity of cyber ecosystem has introduced more complex security challenges to the industry in the era of fourth industrial revolution, what more in the future with the implementation of 5G. In principle, whenever organizations become part of the business supply chain, if they are connected and using more technologies, they are actually at risk. In view of this, by right, industry has to reassess the impact of this technology on cybersecurity, not only within their organization, but also other organizations within the supply chain. And this is nothing new. It is about risk management, but not many organizations do that. And most this area is often overlooked. What is important here, we should realize cybersecurity today is about business supply chain that consists of various security links, and we have to manage the weakest link. Any of the link broken, the whole security supply chain will also broken. So it is about end-to-end solution. Then every point within the network is very important. Talking about supply chain, maybe I just want to quote last year in US, hackers had compromised the infrastructure of SolarWinds. You can check this information in the internet. SolarWinds, a company that produces a network and application monitoring platform. This was a supply chain attack where most organizations are not prepared for this sort of cyber attack. The attack compromised many SolarWinds prominent customers, including the top 10 US telecommunication companies within its supply chains. So when we talk about 5G, it will be foundation of everything about 4th IR, as the current mobile network of 4G will not be able to cope with all the various opportunities that come along with 4th RI when it is fully implemented. And it is just a matter of time, but not at the moment. So in the future, if we don't have 5G, we don't have forced industrial revolution. So 5G basically is a game change. But what we have to understand, whenever technology change, criminal also change. And our threat landscape also change. We have to realize criminal benefit the same technology to enhance their knowledge and skill. And in fact, they will come up with new tools and techniques in committing cyber attack, replacing traditional methods. We have seen how cyber physical connectivity has led us to the situation where cyber world and physical world are converging and becoming more interdependent on each other. Of course, such connectivity enable the industry can deliver various services with better speed, accuracy, and higher capacity. At the same time, such interdependency also introduces greater risk, since any failure in one sector can propagate to other sectors. In a physical cyber connectivity environment, any cyber attack or disruption on any digital system can cause physical consequences in real world. Imagine cyber attack on medical or hospital system in which critical patients rely on that system to survive. Any disruption on that system can kill the patient. Also imagine cyber attack on a computer system that control generators and machine used in industrial sector, such as gas, power, and nuclear plants. Any disruption on that computer control system can cause the machine to vibrate and go haywire, and subsequently may lead to explosion. The same scenario if a cyber attack happened on aircraft, they undermine its computer, communication, and navigation system. This may cause the aircraft to crash that will kill the passengers. All these scenarios are no longer theories. In fact, they have become reality and very alarming in the future with higher connectivity and advanced technology. And at the same time, we are dealing with various threat actors in cyberspace who have a different motivation behind cyber attack. And we have no ideas who are behind the computers and their motivations. So when criminals use different techniques, tactics, and procedure to conduct cyber attack, they also have targeting. They are also targeting certain target to pursue their various motives. So targeted attack require customized cybersecurity solution. In cybersecurity, it is important for us to know the threat actors behind cyber attack, and from there we can identify the right possible solution in order to mitigate or to address the actors. Different solution will address different actors. So if we understand wrong actors and understand wrong motivation, possibly our cyber security solutions are not effective. In the context of Malaysia, as we know, we are in the process of transforming itself into becoming a digital nation. This made Malaysia and other countries in this region become very attractive to cyber criminals and other threat actors. In the past, we always thought that cyber attack only happened in the West and not in this region. But today, as we progress, as this region progress, we are facing various different types of cyber incidents in the form of cyber espionage, cyber crimes, malware attack, so on and so forth. So, cybersecurity has been the subject of our major security concern, and in view of this, Malaysia has to respond, and as well as other regions, other countries in this region have to respond to the various cybersecurity challenges which are evolving with the application of technology. So otherwise, if we don't respond to these changes of technology and cyber threat, the computers or advanced technology like artificial intelligence or force IR, 5G, will be the same technology in the future be used by the criminals to go against us. So I have 2 more slides. Traditional approach of cybersecurity is no longer effective in dealing with advanced threat. And all this while, we can see that most organizations always think that cyber attack come from outside. So most of them focus so much on technical solutions such as firewall, IDS, intrusion detection system, web filter to protect against such external threat. But we have already discussed that advanced attack can always bypass those security parameters to breach our computers. In fact, most of attacks, they are already inside our networks. The issue is how fast we detect this intrusion. So in this case, using technical solutions are no longer, it is important, but no longer sufficient to protect our networks. So we have to enhance and go beyond technical solution to study the behavior of the attack. So in this context, organization must implement innovative adaptive cybersecurity, having the ability to analyze attack behavior and be adaptive to threat. Organization should continue to assess risk and put in place suitable cyber security solution in responding to the changing threat landscape and technological changes. Furthermore, in reality, no matter what we do to protect our networks, cyber attack will happen. As I mentioned, there is no 100% security, and it is almost impossible for us to achieve zero risk environment. So this is the reality. But more importantly, how we organization respond to cyber attack and network intrusion. This is about cyber resilience, our ability to respond, by securing our critical services in order to minimize the impact of cyber attack, so that organization can continue to function and protect the interests of stakeholders and customers. This is very particularly important when we are talking about the security of critical national information infrastructure, because any disruption on these critical services will affect the nation's ability to function, and in the long run, it will undermine national security. Okay, cybersecurity innovation and how we should move forward in terms of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity innovation must evolve with technology advancement, meaning that a cybersecurity practitioner need to be innovative and stay ahead of cyber criminal in order to win the game. And we must be equally evolutionary and dynamic, and we also must use the same advanced technology. I think in the previous session we talked about the 5G. Yes, 5G is a technology. As I mentioned, technology is a double-edged sword. We must remember criminals also use the same infrastructure, the same facilities to conduct cyber attack, replacing traditional method. So this is about the game. And today's cyber attack is not done in traditional method. It is done by artificial intelligence, in which the technology itself can study our vulnerabilities, exploit that vulnerabilities, and it is also the technology is able to hijack and take control of our system. So everything is done in the speed of machine, because through the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we in the cybersecurity community, we have to be equally innovative and use the same innovation. Malaysia has already launched Malaysia Cyber Security Strategy that consists of 5 pillars, as shown on the screen. So just a very quick and to glance through all these pillars. Good governance, where the various agencies should play their respective role, and collectively they should work together in order to achieve a cyber security objective within the ecosystem. We should have effective legislative and regulatory environment to ensure compliance for the protection of information security, digital asset, and any non-compliance for that matter should be adequately addressed by the laws and regulations. Innovative technology and R&D, cyber security solution must be up to date, and parallel with technology advancement, we should enhance our R&D in order to cope with cyber threats which are dynamic and ever evolving, and effective human capacity and capability building to ensure that we have all the time sufficient talent with required knowledge, skill, and attitude. In addition, our professional and practitioner are to be trained and retrained, certified and recertified to meet the demand of the industry and society in the future. And last but not least, strong regional and global collaboration. Malaysia cannot work alone in cybersecurity because cyber threats are cross-border, and it has various evidential, jurisdictional, and legal issues, and our laws are confined within our boundaries. We can impose our law to another countries, so we are not effective in dealing with cross-border cyber attacks. But how we deal with a cross-border cyber attack is through mutual understanding and collaboration with other players within the industry. So we share the same cyberspace, and we share the same ecosystem in order to achieve our mutual interest in cyberspace. So we have to work together, because any countries or any organization within our cyberspace, if they are attacked, not the implication, the consequences are not only confined within that organization or countries, but also the implication or consequences will spread of other countries because we are sharing the same cyberspace. So with that note, Mr. Moderator, I end my presentation. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Tuan Sazali, for enlightening us on the matters related to the critical national information infrastructure, the threats, the dependency, and so on. So as we are maneuvering our country towards the 5G implementation, having more services that depends on, tailored to 5G. Of course, there are going to be a new introduction of new threats, vulnerability that can be exploited. But at the same time, we cannot deny that the fact that the high dependency on ICT infrastructure has becoming the key element for even the government, all the sectors in Malaysia actually to operation, not only in Malaysia, but to every part of the world, basically. So, and also at the same time, rapid use of ICT in the industry also shift how we perceive culture on cybersecurity that is required, because as you mentioned, we need to some sort of adopt the what you call it as an adaptive technology, continuous risk assessment, risk management, and so on. And I would like to just echo what His Excellency Dr. Tobias mentioned this morning, that fundamentally the work to secure the 5G has to be treated differently, whereby we cannot use the traditional cyber security methods to treat 5G, because it's very new and also it's very niche. So there's a requirement also for collaboration with the industry as we move forward with regards to 5G. So with that, I would like to invite Ms. Jennifer Stockwell from Telstra to also share with us her views related to securing ICT infrastructure in the area of 5G implementation. Thank you, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you to Lieutenant Colonel Sazali for his remarks. In representing Telstra, which is Australia's largest telecommunications provider, I will just cover an operator's perspective on 5G journey and the opportunities that brings, the potential security threats, and some governance strategies and practical mechanisms that we're using to reduce security risks. And as Tobias said this morning, we can't use traditional security methods. 5G actually demands that we also change the way that we're working as security teams and network teams. So yeah, it's all about how we harness opportunities while protecting our critical infrastructure. So for Telstra, 5G is very exciting because it brings a world of opportunity. It brings faster mobile networks with higher capacity. It's going to underpin critical services. And Lieutenant Colonel Sazali mentioned about the different sectors in Malaysia's critical infrastructure. We're now expanding in Australia our sectors to 11 sectors. And really 5G will touch all of those because of the way it underpins so many different critical services, from health to through the grocery supply chain to transport, all across the board. So it's going to allow our network to reach areas that it never could before. Particularly exciting for us is that extension of our reach into rural and remote areas of Australia, because that promotes inclusivity and allows more people access to the benefits of technology. But also there are examples such as getting better signal in a crowded stadium, gaming. The gaming community is very excited about the fast network, and things like smart factories. So our 5G journey. So our 5G network leadership at the moment, our total 5G coverage now reaches more than 75% of the Australian population, with nearly 3 times as many 5G sites as our closest competitor. We've expanded our 5G rollout to more than 240 cities and towns across Australia, including over 200 locations in regional Australia, where Telstra is the only 5G available to customers. So again, it's really exciting to be able to extend the network and give people better service and better connectivity. And now we're not just leading in Australia, but we are also among the 5G leaders in independent global rankings. And from a security team perspective, that drives us to deliver the best security and resilience we can, because the world is watching. In terms of key milestones along our 5G journey, we've been running a non-standalone architecture for a couple of years now, but we're starting to move from hardware appliances and custom built to being able to move to virtualized and containerized platforms. That gives us lots more flexibility because it's all built on IT applications rather than traditional hardware. With our sort of virtual RAN, we can use a wider range of vendors. That helps us to drive down costs and deliver more network capability, use more spectrum. And we're also exploring Open RAN, and we're starting to activate millimeter wave capabilities that allows us to use more bandwidth. In the core, we're using open source components. Again, that allows us to be much more flexible and have rapid development. And finally, with edge compute, we're pushing more compute to the edges of the network that allows us to process data at speed and helps us to automate. Now, in doing all of this, the potential security threats that we're considering, now exactly as Lieutenant Colonel Sazali mentioned, there's an explosion of devices, especially in IoT, that increases the attack surface. So we have to consider the threat in a different way, but we also have, through the way that 5G works, an increased ability to detect quickly, to isolate through network slicing, for example, and auto-remediate cyber attacks. So while there is a threat, there is also an opportunity there to be more rapid in responding to it. So the types of threats, security threats that we're considering, the traditional illegal interception of communications will still be a threat on 5G, and that threat actors' potential to take control of network slices. Now, we're working with our colleagues globally in different operators to lock down connectivity to minimize those threats. The second thing we think about is traffic surges and denial of services attacks. So traditionally, we always considered those attacks as coming from external to our network. But now we do have to be alert to the possibility that IoT devices within a network could be mobilized as part of a denial of service attack. So again, it's about detecting that and minimizing the impact as quickly as we can. Finally, in terms of threat, because we can use so many different IT applications and different types of software, we have much more software vulnerabilities that we need to be across. So when we're moving to a multi-vendor environment, there's more to keep on top of. So again, automation becomes key. Some of the governance regimes and the practical mechanisms that we are putting in place and working with to mitigate these threats include adhering to industry recognized standards and hopefully globally recognized standards, which means we've got more interoperability with our global supply chain. Really looking at the value of having a minimum security baseline, and that's something that we are starting to see being mandated in some of the emerging legislation in Australia, and we also see some of that, for example, in the UK, a minimum security baseline for telecommunications security, because we're underpinning so many other critical services. In doing this, we need to understand interdependencies between critical infrastructure and the consequences of a compromise or an impact. So to get that really good understanding of that threat landscape, we need constant engagement with both government and industry partners, both in Australia and globally, to understand the threat landscape. So we do a lot of that through partnerships, but increasingly in Australia and globally, we'll see a trend towards mandatory sharing of threats to make sure that the governments are getting the full picture. And that's something that we're expecting and we're working with. Supply chain, critical that we have robust supply chain assessment and strong engagement with our key vendors to make sure that everybody in building the network is considering confidentiality, integrity, availability, but also resilience. So that includes ensuring you've got a diverse range of suppliers, a diverse range of locations, and you know how to manage the impact of an outage or a compromise. On a practical level, I think I mentioned earlier that we need to really change the way we're working. So the way that we're doing that to building kind of security by design is to have cross-functional teams between our networking and IT and cyber experts that helps build in security to the continuous development pipeline. And we're constantly innovating, so we have to be part of that conversation as we develop new parts of the network, as we add new different scenarios, different types of businesses start to take up that technology. Security has to be there from the beginning. So in conclusion, all of those measures enable us to safely realize the vast benefits of 5G, both for government and for the private sector and for the broader community, especially through that scale and reach of critical services and the access to technology for more citizens. The innovation's moving really quickly now. So regulation and legislation is going to need to keep pace. And that security by design is really critical to long-term success. And we're already having to think about 6G scenarios while still grappling with what 5G security means. So it's a really exciting space to be in. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of our journey today.
Thank you, Ms. Jennifer, for your insightful in terms of the implementation by Telstra of 5G in Australia. So the keyword is actually about security by design. And I believe that by having a cross-functional personnel within the project implementation, somehow also making sure that all elements that we required for security by design will be taken care and also will be put in place to ensure we can have a secure, trusted, and also resilient 5G networks, basically. And I also would like to quote in terms of what you say in terms of international cooperation, also in terms of sharing type of threats seen by other countries to other countries. Because I've read in the news that even in the EU, there's a Western alliance whereby they agree on 5G security guidelines, whereby they call it as a Prague Principle 2019. So I think we can also model that actually for our region together with Australia in coming up with the same allies to ensure that we can always share in terms of the risks that we see, the threats and so on. So that having said that, all will be connected together, so we will be able to produce a secure and trusted and resilient network, basically. I want to pass the floor to Mr. Haris Zaino, our co-moderator also for this session. Shall there any Q&A that we need to address for this session? Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Puan. Thanks also to the speakers for the insightful presentations. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A box, but unfortunately they've been shifted to the answered question. I'll just read them out from there. Let's read this out there. On one hand, Lieutenant Colonel Sazali earlier mentioned that security and convenience are meant to be opposites. Simultaneously, governments are attempting to regulate industries to practice security by design principles. And the question asks, what are the difficulties in enforcing this? Lieutenant Colonel Sazali, would you like to answer that first, please?
Okay, thank you for the question. As I mentioned just now, during my presentation, there is no direct formula. And at the end of the day, what more important before we come up with our proposed cyber security control measures, we have to do risk management. That's why in cyber security, we don't talk about risk avoidance or risk eradication. We cannot avoid risk. We are talking about risk management. How we manage risk? At what level we can tolerate or accept risk within our organization? So we have to perform this risk management, and from there we can, because how the application of technology will give new risks which are evolving from that application, and from there we can determine and what sort of solution that we had to put in place. Again, another issue is that some organizations they perceive cybersecurity is technical issue, whereas when we talk about budgetary, the need for expert human resource, it requires investment budget. So cybersecurity is about investment, and it depends how much money that organizations are willing to invest in this industry. That means, so how much the right figure? Again, there is no calculation or formula to give that figure. It's up to the how the organization value or address cybersecurity in the organization, and how they perform the risk management, and how the top management who make decision and policy understand the need of cybersecurity that are handled at the technical and tactical level by technical experts. So there are many issues here. So maybe strategic people have different understanding, because of course they try to minimize the cost as much as possible, because it will profit. If you spend more money on this technology, that means less profit. But the technical people, the expert, they want all these things in place. So how to balance is another issue. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Ms. Jennifer, would you like to add on to that question anywhere? Perhaps you can speak about perhaps how do you balance, coming from a telecommunications provider's perspective, how do you balance between profits and convenience for the users, and also cybersecurity issues?
So yeah, I think we really have to prioritize when we're looking at new developments and new innovation, prioritize the benefits for our customers and for the wider economy. And so, I mean, the goal is that security and convenience should be able to coexist. If security is part of the conversation from the earliest point, from the inception of the idea, and we think about the risks at that point and work out how we're going to build in risk management and mitigation. And in that way, we should remove friction from the user to give them the best experience. And that's, we all should be, as an operator, that should be our goal, whether we're from the security team or the networks team or the products team. What we do in our risk management is really focus on helping the network teams to take ownership of the risks. The risk is not all belonging in the cybersecurity team just because it's a cyber risk. We can advise, but actually they own the risk, and we help them learn how to manage that. And they should be able to articulate how they're building in security to their architecture and what the risks are and what they're doing about those. So that's a shift, I think, because without that we can't scale and we can't move quickly in innovation.
All right, thank you. Earlier, there's some talk about how not many organizations look at risk management on cybersecurity issues. I think this was one of the points that Colonel Sazali made during his presentation. My question is, like, why is this the case, right? Is it due to a lack of awareness generally, or it's more of a financial constraint from companies, perhaps not someone as large as Telstra being the largest telecommunications operator, but perhaps if we can speak more generally, why is this culture of cybersecurity and risk management not inculcated better? Because at this point we all know the risks, right? Why is this not being implemented at the business level? Perhaps if we can go back to Lieutenant Colonel Sazali first, and then we can go to Ms. Jennifer for comments.
Okay. All this while we perceive cybersecurity is technical issue, and most of the time in the past, when organization face all these technical security issues, they pass to IT people to address. But actually, cybersecurity is more than technical issues. It's about people, it's about strategy issues, it's about management. At the end of the day, it's about decision making by the top management. And why it is not, and when we talk about cybersecurity, also we also always address about people, process, and technology. So this concept must be integrated, and it is and addressed at all levels, at tactical, operational, and strategic. Unless we can inculcate this culture and understanding, and have the right program to pass the information or education, it is difficult because we need participation from all levels, especially the top management who make decision, and they have to make the right decision. So whatever policy they decide, whatever thing that they at the end, organization, they want to achieve their strategic objective, and they should view cybersecurity as enabler in the sense that cybersecurity can ensure secure application of technology, and from there, organization can benefit from them to achieve their objective. These are the things that the organization have to see, but most of the time, organizations see that cybersecurity is obstacle, stumbling block that stop them from progressing, whereas cybersecurity is enabler. That is my view on this, Haris.
All right, thank you. Ms. Jennifer, anything to add? Perhaps you can just speak more broadly about the culture of cybersecurity.
I mean, to echo what Lieutenant Colonel Sazali has said, cyber risk is a factor in probably every one of a company's wider enterprise risks, be that, for example, financial or reputational. All of those can be impacted through cyber threats. So there's kind of no escaping that it's part of everyone's job. But I think there's still a lag from that traditional model where, oh, it's an IT issue, we need to pass it to an IT team. So our focus in Telstra is to try and empower our wider teams beyond cybersecurity to have a grasp of what the risks are and how to mitigate them, so that they only need to engage the cybersecurity team on sort of edge cases or things that are a bit trickier, or where they need some specialized advice, but otherwise it should be part of how they're operating. And we'll do a lot of practical help to give people fundamental cyber knowledge, to provide them micro credentials in cybersecurity. We have a community across the business of cyber evangelists who are in all different teams who get some basic training and education about cyber risks. So we're trying to kind of scale that out so that we can really apply our specialist knowledge where it's most needed.
All right, thanks for that. We have a question from Andrew Poo, which I think nicely builds on the comments earlier. He says that if you're unaware or unsensitized about the cybersecurity threats, even with 2G, 3G, or even 5G technology, how do users even begin to recognize and be alert to cybersecurity threats within the 5G environment? And I know there's a lot of mention about awareness programs being made, micro credentials that you have mentioned, Jennifer. But has that been successful all this while? Is there any metrics to show that this kind of efforts has been successful? Or if not, what can we be doing better? And perhaps let's turn this around, and Ms. Jennifer, you can start first, and then we can pass the floor to Lieutenant Colonel Sazali for his comments.
Yeah, so in terms of metrics of what's been effective, I mean, things like, many organizations run a phishing drill program, and we've definitely seen reduction in employees engaging with fake phishing emails. So that's really, that's a kind of positive metric. It's quite hard to get other metrics because it's almost, you need metrics on how you've changed someone's way of thinking. But so we have more anecdotal things, like we have people in wider teams putting their hand up to say, oh, look, I've seen this thing and I think it's a security risk, and I don't think this is quite right. Now that tells us that the message is being amplified. To go to kind of the earlier part of your question about how to sensitize the users and the end users to the cyber threat, I think some of it is about understanding the value of your data, and if that were to fall into the wrong hands, or the value of your asset if it were to be impacted, and to try and look at it from that perspective. Because I think sometimes you can think, oh, nothing, this is all fine, but it's tricky, but can you put yourself in a mind of an attacker or somebody who wants to gather information about you and think, well, actually, what could they stand to gain by what I'm exposing here, or what I'm what the server that I'm exposing to the internet, which maybe doesn't need to be. Yeah, there's no single answer, but it's kind of a shift in mindset, I think.
Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Sazali, over to you.
Okay. In my earlier presentation, I always ask for audience to understand our cyber environment because it is important. Because most of the user or organization, why they don't understand the risk, the actual risk, because they don't understand the technologies that they are using. So as users, we must know the technology that we are using, the vulnerabilities, the opportunities, as well as the risks which are evolving from that technology. So if we are using 4G, then we have to understand what is 4G. If we are using 5G, we have to understand what is 5G, the opportunity and the risk. The same thing with other technologies, social media, for example. It provides very good convenient services to the users, social media. But most of the users, they don't understand social media. But by right, we have to really understand this social media technology and also understand the risk. From then we know how to protect ourselves. That is the issue facing the user because they don't understand the users, the technology. The same thing that when we want to use a knife, we know what knife can do. It can do a lot of things in the kitchen, but we must understand what it can do that before we can take security preconceived measures in order to protect maybe our children. So this is the thing. Always try to understand and must understand the technologies that we are using. And in a current environment of a highly interconnected world, sometimes organizations, they don't realize there are new technologies, they are connected to their networks. And and when they do the risk management, they just focus the technology that they are using. But they don't realize there are also shadow devices. They are also connected to their networks. And they fail to understand this. And these are the devices that can bring all this malware into the networks. Or the personal devices, they don't really look into this. Sometimes infection comes from USB, from handphone, in which sometimes the organization overlook. So it can be because the detail of cybersecurity solution depend on how detailed you perform the risk management. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I think, let me just say this, that, the awareness or the sensitization on cybersecurity threats, that point has been impressed on me completely. I'm going to review all my cyber practices after this. But, the thing is, right, coming from a position of a non-practitioner, so my main research area is not cybersecurity, right, although I look at digital policies. It seems to be a case where Lieutenant Colonel Sazali has mentioned, or at least referred to this before, that a lot of people that are non-practitioners view this whole area as something that's technical, that the barriers to understanding or learning about the area is quite high, because you need some sort of technical background, expertise, or familiarity in trying to figure out what's the most safe practices that you can do online. But let me just ask this, right? How likely are these concerns that we've elaborated on, over this session and the previous session, how likely are they to actually manifest into something real for the ordinary users and for, perhaps Lieutenant Colonel Sazali can speak on behalf of the government, from the government's perspective on the threat perceptions and how real it is, and Ms. Jennifer, you can talk about from the operator's perspective, like how real are these threats? And I would assume that if you are an organization or institution of interest, then the threat perception would be higher. But perhaps if you can allude to how it would be for the ordinary people, someone like perhaps me, what kind of threats would I face? That'd be great. Yeah, Ms. Jennifer, you would start.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's an interesting kind of question because to some extent, I think, when cybersecurity was beginning, it kind of served this industry to say, oh, it's very special and it's very complicated and it's, you could never understand it. But now we want everyone to understand it. So we've got to kind of completely change the narrative and the way that we're working. In terms of, are these threats real? Look, absolutely. And we're constantly doing more and more to keep up with them. But we almost have to see it's foreseeable that some threat at some point will eventuate. And so we have to also have really resilient networks and systems to respond and to minimize the impact. But, you know, we all individuals will see impacts. We've seen that around the world with, especially with ransomware, which actually I think ransomware is really, it's the spread of ransomware has kind of helped with, you know, it's not a good thing, but it's kind of helped with the narrative in that it's a very visible manifestation of a threat. And so the effects of it in terms of healthcare systems being knocked offline, payment systems not working, people not being able to get supplies from, you know, one place to another, those are real impacts on people's everyday lives. And it's kind of brought cyber to the forefront rather than, you know, you can talk about espionage and intelligence collection activities, but for a normal, an everyday person, that's not necessarily something that's going to be relevant to their lives directly or that they're going to see an impact from. So yeah, absolutely, these threats can realize we've got to be positioned to respond. We've got to accept that they will happen and we've got to be resilient.
Yeah. Okay, Lieutenant Colonel Sazali.
Okay, when talking about cybersecurity, the program must be targeting the user at all levels. Of course, the very low level is targeting the awareness and basic education of the internet users. At least as a users, we must know how to protect our computers against malware attack, for example, how to use strong password. These are basic. Password is the key to our computers. It's just like a main door to our house. If this password is compromised, our computer can be hijacked and taken control. So this is very basic. As users, we must know. And again, how to protect our computers against malware. This one very basic. And at second level is those who are responsible to look after cybersecurity in organization. And these are practitioners. So they must be trained, pre-trained and certified. And at the top level, of course, we want to produce more professional. So our program, for example, like Cybersecurity Malaysia, we always come up with this type of program, not only technical, or we also target the various level of users from as low as school children, parents, until the consultant. And all these things must work together because in many cyber attack, the most advanced one, they can even start with a simple attack at the low level targeting users. I can show you one example. In 2015, if I can remember the date, attack on carbon attack. The gang has stolen $1 billion from 100 financial institutions, and each institution lost about $2.5 to $10 million. It is not at random, it is targeted. So what the criminal did was, it started with a spear phishing attack in the beginning, stealing the credential and user information of the employees by spreading spam email, and some of the employees click the link or download the attachment without they realize they download the malware, and from there the criminal created the backdoor and used the backdoor to further explore the networks and of course study the internet operations. But the loss, the damage, $1 billion. You can see, it's just not a technical issue or user issue. It affects the top management. At the end of the day, the organization, the top management has to answer to the stakeholders because $1 billion. So in this regard, what I think the organization must realize the importance of cybersecurity at all levels. That's why the policy is very important. I wonder how many organizations have cybersecurity in place. And some of us don't have cybersecurity policy in organization. So these are basic. Thank you.
Right,
Hi, Mr. Harris, Edwin Yap here from the previous session.
Yes.
I just want to jump in and comment on this about the awareness taking off from the last Q&A, if I may.
Sure.
Yeah,
Or if you can make it quick, yeah.
Yeah, my video is out, so I have a bit of trouble with it. So pardon me for that. I think what I like to see, at least from a media point of view, is that as companies roll out 5G, or even 4G for that matter, more messaging must be targeted at creating better awareness. A lot of times when operators market their stuff, they are marketing their products and services. They push that to the forefront. I don't think enough is being done from a cyber security point of view, you know, talking about ransomware, you know, so on and so forth. The enterprise world is kind of like focusing on this concept called zero trust. I'm sure the panelists know what I'm talking about here. Zero trust basically is based on the concept of least privileged access. It's all about never trusting, always verifying, always assuming that breaches can and will happen, knowingly or unknowingly. I think this is a concept that must be permeated among consumers. Even as you roll out 5G, more messaging should be targeted on this. But I suspect also operators do not like to talk about such things because these things also scare potential customers away. So it's about weighing the pros and cons. But there is space that as 5G rolls out, this has to be kind of emphasized. At least that's what I like to see from a media point of view. I hope that's been useful for our listeners. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Mr. Adrian, for that interjection.
Haris, I think there's one question that
Oh yeah, sure.
not as answered, but it is from Mr. Joshim Babo of the Australian High Commission. It is actually a question for Ms. Jennifer. What lesson then from Australia's 5G experience might be applicable for Malaysia? What are the positive pitfalls and what would Telstra do in hindsight that it didn't do in the past?
Oh, wow.
Quite a long question.
Yeah, lessons from Australia's 5G experience. I mean, part of our 5G experience has been, I mean, certainly, and I'm not an expert in Malaysia's geography, but I think what I mentioned earlier about really considering those benefits that 5G has for those communities that haven't previously been able to be connected and haven't been able to be included in things like, you know, what's very important with COVID, things like online learning and online health services. Really looking at your rollout from the perspective of whether you're considering that, as well as all the exciting technology advances. It's actually the real basic things that could mean the world to some of those who haven't been able to have that connectivity before. From sort of more of a regulatory perspective, really having as much sort of clarity. This has been tricky, and it's been something we're very engaged in. Having as much clarity as possible from the government on their expectations of the operator's security and how we do security. Now that's difficult when 5G is completely new, and how do we know how to do security because we're just building it? So I think, and we probably didn't do this in a fully integrated way, but as much as you can have your kind of government cyber experts and your operator kind of network experts workshopping ideas for security really early on and as you're building and kind of coming together and collaborating. I think that's really helpful because it helps government to understand what the risks are, what the commercial pressures are, and to come out with an overall good national security outcome. So we definitely did some of that. If we could have done more and been together more, which we haven't been able to with COVID, if we could have spent more time kind of workshopping and testing together, that would have been great, but the circumstances haven't always allowed recently.
So the keyword is actually during the early stage, the transparency has to be there. It means what are the destinations that you want to go, and also what are the paths that you're going to go through, what are the obstacles that you need to, to handle and everything. So the transparency is the keywords basically. So Haris, do we still have time for Q&A or we're ending it soon?
Yeah, we have until 12:50, so we have about 7 minutes left upon us, Lina.
Okay, all right then. Maybe to Jennifer also, because Australia already implemented the 5G. Maybe you can provide us with in-depth and also insightful information on the popular 5G testing questions actually. How will the new cases for 5G, like autonomous driving and also the IoT affect how Tesla do tests on the mobile network basically. If let's say before this, maybe we were just plugging into one of the routers and then run our wire packet or even our Wireshark and see the packets whether you have noise and everything. But because you will have multiple devices connecting to the network, so definitely the test mechanism will be different. So maybe some insight information from you, maybe Jennifer.
Yes, absolutely. So we've done some early kind of research testing with a couple of specific use cases. One was an agricultural one, kind of measuring measuring crops and the development there. I think we've had some kind of transport use cases, so early kind of collaborations, I think even with academia on the actual scenarios, things like water and volumes of water in dams to minimize wastage, and that's been really effective. So those are kind of some of the scenarios. But in terms of testing, we already had mobile test labs that where we can fully simulate our network. So our test engineers will go there and sort of play with all different types of new technology. So we have those, Telstra has those, and we have a 5G innovation centre on the Gold Coast in Queensland as well, where that testing and collaboration can happen in a dedicated space. And just finally to mention that the Australian government is now kind of starting to look at, well, how do they help support operators in testing and developing labs?
So it really much depends on the business case, whether it's for agriculture, whether it's for water system, electrical, and something like that. All right. Okay. We have a participant that raised his hand. Haris, maybe you can invite the personnel to
Yeah, Miss Sharifah, I think. Let me try allowing to talk. Let's see if this works. Miss Sharifah, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you very much for allowing me to raise one question. I hope I have time. I would very much like to hear regarding the regulatory views, especially in Australia's experience. I heard you mention regarding how the regulators actually expect governments to put up clear regulations and how government should actually assist together with regulator in terms of providing a clear policy. So I would very much ask, would very much like to learn on and listen on your views. What if at the international level, I mean, as a sovereign state, government goes to the sovereign state platform where there is a UN that actually discuss at the regional level, also discuss where the government's diplomats went, and there are also the discussions about security, cyber securities, that includes 5Gs and whatnot. And we also understand that 5G is also becoming geopolitical issues. But coming from the government, I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Sharifah. I'm coming from the National Security Council of Malaysia. So my question would be, for regulators, what do you expect from the government who actually sit down regularly to discuss about how we want to enhance cyber stability? But at the same time, there are issues that we need to inherit as well at the government level to make sure that we actually maintain our sovereign right as well as all the economic values. But for the perspective of regulators that need to balance between the economical as well as businesses as well as raising the economy. What is the expectations that you see as a whole?
Yes, Jennifer, the question is for
you. Yes, no, good, that's fine. So I think on a practical level, what's helpful to have is, I think I mentioned before, but a minimum baseline of security expectations that government has. Now we have some frameworks here. There's also global sort of standards and frameworks. Knowing what's expected so that we don't stray and have gone down a path that actually is not acceptable for national security geopolitical reasons. That's really helpful, both in kind of network infrastructure, but also in our supply chain. So what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in the supply chain. Now in Australia, the 5G guidance from government, or the 5G direction of 2018, provides operators with some clarity about excluding vendors from the network that the government considers high risk because of things like conflicting national interests and conflicting legislation in certain locations. But that has to obviously for each country be tailored to your own threat environment and threat profile. So that's in relation to the Australian threat environment and what we see as our key strategic threats. But a location or a vendor that's high risk to us may not be high risk to another country that has a different threat environment. But you know, I think from a regulator, it's really helpful to have that clarified as much as possible early, because our network engineers are really grateful to not kind of pursue a path that then we later have to tell them, well, actually, no, we can't do that, and we need to take a different approach, because it wastes time and it wastes money. So early engagement is key.
Okay, thank you.
Do we still have time for one more question, Haris?
Sure. I think that's okay. I'm not the timekeeper. I think Farlina is supposed to be, but yeah. Let's do it. One more question.
Okay, all right. Again, for Jennifer, actually, how do you balance actually in Australia between the real or the true experience and also with the concerns about the true experience of using 5G versus the concerns about 5G, the hype especially. For example, the 5G, some sort of transmit more radiation that weakens the immune system, therefore enabling the spreading of COVID-19 and so on. So do you do it as a service provider, or you could do collaboration with the governments or any government agency in terms of, about all of this hype and making sure that the correct information goes to the consumer and also to the people in Australia? Yeah.
So yeah, we focus on the real facts from authoritative sources around things like electromagnetic energy. We actually were very proactive when we noticed this was happening. We're very proactive in our 5G communications. If you go and have a look for Telstra 5G and electromagnetic energy, you'll find we did our corporate communications team was excellent and went out and did some videos with a sort of almost with a comedian kind of angle to it, to busting all those myths.
Yes.
So we're really aware of it, but we're trying to also kind of say, look, no, this is safe. This is, these are the facts, and get out there on all the different channels that our customers are using. So across social media, and both with the government and as our own organisation. So yeah, if you Google that, you'll see kind of some of the innovative approaches we took to our communications there.
So it's more through your corporate communication itself. But do you do some sort of joint program with the government's entity, for example, your health ministry or something like that, related to all of this?
I believe that they did their own statements and all kind of be aligned and back up. Well, they're all because they're all directed back to the facts and the research. Yeah.
Understood. So back to you, Haris. So we should be ending the session, or we're still waiting for Farlina?
I think we're good to end. We have 2 minutes over time. Yeah. So thank you everyone on behalf of the panel. Can I just pass the floor back to Ms. Farlina?
Thank you very much, participants and panelists. I do apologize. I realized we actually had one last question that came in last minute, so we're so sorry for that, Mr. Andruku. If it's all right, I think we may have to actually take this on another day, because obviously the 5G conversation is actually such a large conversation. There's only so much that we can actually tackle. Yeah,
it is.
So we thank you. We thank you, Azlina, for moderating. Also, our panelists for the great insights, and our participants for the great questions. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the program is coming to a close. We wish to convey our heartfelt appreciation for your participation. We wish to also take this opportunity to invite you to ISIS Malaysia's upcoming event, Praxis 2021, that will be held on October 21st and 22nd. Praxis 2021 is a platform to debate and discuss the best ways forward for Malaysia, encompassing environmental and economic sustainability, social politics, and societal development, and also technology. So do visit ISIS Malaysia's website for more details. That being said, we thank you so much. We're holding you 3 minutes past like our designated time, but thank you so much for your time, and we do look forward to your participation in the future platform. Thank you.